The story opens with a chilling act of violence. In the darkness, an unhinged killer brutally executes a man, firing multiple rounds into his victim. Even after the shooting ends, the attacker's cruelty doesn't stop. He savagely kicks the lifeless body lying on the ground before calmly collecting the empty shell casings. Once he finishes cleaning the scene, the killer drapes a cloth over the corpse, leaving behind a grim reminder of his brutality. The narrative then shifts to a newcomer arriving in the quiet town of Margrave, Georgia. The man is Jack Reacher, a former officer from the military police. Having just stepped off a bus, Reacher walks through the small town toward a nearby bar. On his way, he notices a man angrily yelling at his girlfriend in public. The disrespect instantly irritates Reacher. He doesn't say a word, but the intensity of his stare alone is enough to unsettle the aggressor. The man quickly backs down, muttering an apology to the embarrassed woman as Reacher continues on his way. Inside the tavern, Reacher takes a seat and orders something simple. The bartender soon places a hot cup of coffee in front of him, along with a slice of cassava bread. Just as he's about to take his first bite, the calm atmosphere of the bar shatters. Several police cars suddenly surround the building, their presence sending waves of confusion and anxiety through the customers. Reacher watches carefully as officers storm inside. To his surprise, they move directly toward him. Despite knowing he hasn't done anything wrong, he's placed under arrest as a suspect in a murder case. Remaining calm, Reacher offers no resistance and allows himself to be taken into custody. At the police station, Officer Roscoe Conklin begins questioning him, hoping to learn more about who he is. Reacher offers almost nothing in return, only his name. A search of his belongings turns up very little. A passport, $200 in cash, and a Medal of Honor. Soon after, Chief Detective Oscar Finlay steps in to take over the interrogation. Finlay explains the seriousness of the situation. A body was discovered just across the street, and Reacher is the prime suspect. According to the evidence, the victim was shot at close range with a 9mm round directly in the back of the head. The corpse also showed signs of severe beating, suggesting the killer had gone far beyond simply pulling the trigger. Identifying the victim has proven difficult because the fingertips are swollen, complicating fingerprint analysis. Finlay offers to arrange a lawyer for Reacher, but he declines the offer, firmly maintaining that he had nothing to do with the killing. Meanwhile, Officer Conklin begins digging into Reacher's background. What she finds is unusual. There's almost no trace of him online, no social media presence, no digital footprint of any kind. The only basic information available reveals that both of his parents are deceased and that he has an older brother named Joe, 2 years older than him. Despite his past as the head of a specialized investigation unit within the military police, a role that undoubtedly required him to take lives when necessary, Conklin senses that Reacher isn't the type of man who would commit a senseless murder. While discussing the case, Reacher begins analyzing the crime itself. Based on the ammunition and the nature of the wounds, he concludes that the killing was likely carried out by 3 people working together. The use of 9mm rounds fitted with subsonic suppressor ammunition, specifically 95-grain bullets, suggests a coordinated operation. Reacher also points out the excessive violence inflicted on the victim's body after death, implying that the perpetrators may have sadistic tendencies. In his opinion, this wasn't their first murder. Detective Finlay is stunned by the accuracy of Reacher's deductions. Still, he isn't ready to clear him. After all, witnesses reported seeing someone who matches Reacher's physical description near the crime scene. Finlay presses him further, questioning why he came to Margrave in the first place. Reacher finally reveals his reason. He traveled to the town to investigate the death of Blind Blake, a legendary blues musician who had reportedly died there. The timeline of the murder may hold the key to Reacher's freedom. According to the investigation, the victim was killed around midnight. If evidence proves that Reacher was still riding the bus into town at that exact time, the case against him would collapse. Meanwhile, investigators are also examining 2 puzzling clues found on the victim: a phone number written on the man's shoe and a piece of paper bearing the mysterious word pluribus. The story briefly flashes back to Reacher's teenage years. At that time, his family had moved frequently because of his father's work. When Reacher and his older brother Joe arrived in a new town, local teens attempted to intimidate the newcomers, but the brothers refused to be bullied. Instead, they stood their ground and confronted the troublemakers head-on, revealing the strong bond and resilience that shaped Reacher's character. Back in the present day, Reacher sits alone inside a holding cell, forced to wait while the investigation unfolds. Despite the grim circumstances, Officer Roscoe Conklin shows him a small act of kindness by bringing him another cup of coffee. She quietly admits that she doesn't believe he's guilty. From her experience, she says, it's often possible to sense a criminal the moment they walk through the station doors. Reacher, in her eyes, doesn't fit that profile. Still, the investigation has yet to uncover any concrete evidence pointing to someone else. Elsewhere, Detective Finlay follows up on one of the clues. The phone number discovered on the victim's shoe leads him to a residence belonging to a man named Paul Hubble. As Finlay approaches the property, Hubble appears visibly nervous. He glances toward a suspicious vehicle parked across the street, his anxiety rapidly growing. Overwhelmed with fear, Hubble suddenly blurts out a shocking confession, claiming that he is the murderer. But as the questioning continues, his story quickly begins to unravel. Hubble can't even identify the victim or explain why he supposedly committed the crime. It becomes increasingly clear that something about his confession doesn't add up at all. Not long after his dramatic confession, Paul Hubble was thrown into the same holding cell as Jack. The situation seemed strange from the beginning. Soon afterward, new evidence confirmed that Jack could not have committed the murder, and he was officially cleared and released from custody. Still, Detective Oscar Finlay couldn't shake the feeling that something about Paul's confession didn't make sense. Paul was a banker from Atlanta with a spotless reputation and absolutely no criminal history. Everything about his life suggested stability and respectability, not violence. Although Jack was ready to walk away from the entire situation and leave town, Finlay asked him to remain in Margrave for the time being while the investigation continued. During their conversation, Jack's sharp observational skills once again came into play. He began connecting details that others had overlooked. From the information available, he suspected that Paul had some sort of connection to Officer Stevenson. His instinct turned out to be correct. Stevenson was actually married to Paul Hubble. Jack also demonstrated an uncanny ability to read people. In a matter of minutes, he deduced several personal details about Finlay himself. Jack correctly guessed that Finlay had graduated from Harvard, that he had a stubborn personality, and that he was recently divorced but still hoping to reconcile with his wife. He even noticed Finlay's attempt to quit smoking. To test Jack's growing theory about Paul, Finlay contacted Stevenson to verify the banker's alibi. Stevenson confirmed that Paul and his wife had been attending a party that lasted until 2 in the morning, many miles away from the murder scene. That timeline made it impossible for Paul to have committed the crime. Despite this revelation, Finlay still needed time to identify the real killer. As a precaution, he decided to place both Jack and Paul in prison for a week while the investigation moved forward. When they arrived at the correctional facility, the warden greeted them and explained the arrangements. Because of the unusual circumstances surrounding their case, they would be kept in a separate cell away from the general inmate population. Their personal clothing was confiscated and replaced with standard prison uniforms. However, when one of the guards ordered Jack to remove his pants during the intake process, Jack immediately sensed something suspicious. He refused to comply. Calm but firm, he warned the guard that if anyone tried to force him to strip, he wouldn't stay silent about it. After the tense exchange, both Jack and Paul were placed in a cell that stood just under 2 meters high. The following morning, Jack stepped out of the cell block and quickly realized the situation had changed. Instead of being isolated, they were now surrounded by hardened inmates serving life sentences. Jack immediately sensed danger. His concern proved justified when 3 prisoners approached Paul and began harassing him. They snatched his shoes and ripped the glasses off his face. The intimidation escalated as the men attempted to pull off Paul's pants. At that moment, Jack intervened. He calmly warned the attackers to walk away, but when they ignored him, Jack had no choice but to act. In seconds, the confrontation turned violent. Jack swiftly incapacitated the 3 convicts, leaving them beaten and stunned on the floor. Later that day, while the 2 men were sitting in the prison yard, Paul finally opened up about the truth behind his situation. He explained that he worked as a financial manager and had been forced into illegal financial schemes by his powerful boss. According to Paul, refusing to cooperate would have meant certain death. Since arriving in prison, he felt far safer staying close to Jack and rarely left his side, even following him to the bathroom. The following day proved just how justified Paul's fear was. As Jack entered the prison bathroom, 5 large inmates walked in behind him. Their intentions were obvious. They were there to eliminate him. Jack remained calm. He gave them a chance to reconsider, slowly counting to 3 as a warning. But the men rushed him without hesitation. What followed was a brutal but lightning-fast fight. Within moments, Jack had taken down all 5 attackers. Several of them were left unable to move, while one suffered a serious injury to his eye. The violent disturbance quickly drew the attention of prison guards. When officers rushed into the bathroom, they were stunned by what they saw. Jack standing unharmed while 5 inmates lay scattered around him. Initially, prison officials had planned to move Jack and Paul to another cell for protection, but instead, the general population was eventually returned to their usual routine. Back at the police station, Finlay struggled to process what he had learned. Not only had Jack predicted several personal details about his life with eerie accuracy, but the reports of his combat abilities inside the prison were almost unbelievable. Feeling a mix of embarrassment and admiration, Finlay decided to try repairing his own personal life. He even attempted to call his ex-wife, Sharon, hoping to reconcile with her. Meanwhile, Officer Roscoe Conklin continued digging deeper into Jack's history. What she uncovered was remarkable. Jack Reacher was a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and had been awarded the prestigious Silver Star. His record included multiple honors such as the Legion of Merit and the Soldier's Medal. At one point in his career, he had even saved 12 fellow soldiers from a deadly explosion. During his time in military police investigations, he had successfully solved over 150 cases. Learning these details made Finlay seriously question his earlier assumption that Jack might be a murderer. Frustrated with himself for misjudging the situation, Finlay opened his desk drawer and pulled out a pack of cigarettes he had been trying to quit. The following morning during breakfast at the prison, Jack shared an important observation with Finlay. According to him, a correctional officer named Spivey had intentionally placed them into the general population. Jack believed Spivey had been acting under orders from someone higher up. Eventually, both Jack and Paul were released from the prison. Paul was picked up by his wife, while Roscoe arrived to drive Jack away. To finally clear his name beyond any doubt, Roscoe showed Finlay security footage from the bus station. The video clearly showed Jack boarding a bus on the night the murder occurred, proving he had not even been in town at the time of the killing. With his name cleared, Jack planned to leave Margrave behind. But before he could depart, Roscoe invited him to dinner. She also helped him buy a new set of clothes to replace the ones confiscated at the prison, giving him a chance to start fresh before continuing his journey. While visiting a thrift store and stopping by a barbershop for a haircut, Jack begins to sense that someone is keeping a close eye on him. Parked nearby is a car that seems to shadow his movements wherever he goes. Inside the barbershop, the barber's elderly father strikes up a conversation with him and begins sharing the history of Margrave. According to the old man, the town's prosperity can largely be traced back to a wealthy industrialist named Kleiner. Years ago, Kleiner built several highly successful companies in the region and helped transform the small town into a thriving community through the financial support of the Kleiner Foundation. The man also casually mentions that the car tailing Jack belongs to Kleiner's son, known locally as Kleiner Jr., along with his cousin, Dawson. Curious and unwilling to be intimidated, Jack decides to confront them directly. He walks over to the car and asks the two men what exactly they want from him. Kleiner Jr. wastes no time revealing that he already knows about Jack's recent arrest and his past as a military investigator. With a thinly veiled threat, he tells Jack that the people of Margrave won't easily tolerate someone they believe to be an assassin wandering through their town. Not long after that encounter, Jack returns to police headquarters, where Officer Roscoe Conklin informs him about another disturbing development. A second body has been discovered, and the victim appears to have been killed with the same caliber of weapon used in the earlier murder. Jack accompanies her to examine the corpse. As the forensic specialist describes the autopsy findings, Jack studies the body carefully. Something about the case immediately stands out to him. The first victim had apparently suffered from a severe latex allergy. During the struggle, the victim likely grabbed the attacker's hand while wearing a polyvinyl protective layer, possibly used by the killer to prevent leaving behind DNA evidence. Because of the allergic reaction, the victim's hand had swollen dramatically. Jack continues noticing additional details that others might overlook. One of the victim's arms shows signs of a fracture that had healed years earlier, dating back to an injury suffered when the victim was around 8 years old. The treatment had been carried out in Berlin, suggesting a history that extended far beyond Margrave. As Jack pieces together these clues, a devastating realization slowly dawns on him. The victim lying before him is his own older brother, Joe Reacher. The discovery hits Jack with overwhelming force. For a moment, the calm and controlled investigator disappears, replaced by a grieving brother struggling to process the loss. Finlay presses him for answers about why Joe had come to Margrave in the first place, but the questioning only fuels Jack's anger and sorrow, leading to a heated exchange between them. From that moment forward, Jack makes a personal promise. Whoever murdered his brother will be found, and they will face justice. Over the next week, Jack begins digging deeper into the mystery surrounding Joe's death. Officer Roscoe remains assigned to the investigation and works alongside him. Their search for answers eventually leads them to Paul Hubbell's home. While Roscoe speaks with Paul's wife in the living room, Jack quietly slips away to examine the house more closely. In a room filled with Paul's shoes, Jack notices something unusual. One pair has a small seat-like attachment hidden inside the back. The detail catches his attention immediately. Combined with other clues, it strengthens Jack's growing suspicion that Paul might actually be the killer's next intended victim. Jack shares his theory with Roscoe. While he was in prison, he had overheard inmates discussing plans targeting Paul. Another clue further reinforces his suspicion. Small agrimony seeds found stuck to Paul's shoe match the same seeds discovered at the location where Joe's body was found. That suggests Paul had been present at the crime scene at some point. Later, when Jack and Roscoe revisit the murder site, he begins reconstructing the events that likely took place on the night Joe was killed. Examining the footprints left in the dirt and the positions of various clues, Jack determines that the killer demonstrated remarkable accuracy, especially when shooting a second victim who had been running through the darkness. The precision suggests that the shooter was no amateur, but rather someone with professional sniper training. As they continue investigating Joe's background, more information comes to light. Joe had been working for the Department of Homeland Security. His responsibilities involved cases related to drug trafficking, illegal arms trading, and border security operations. Although Jack doesn't know the exact nature of his brother's current assignment, he can't ignore the possibility that Joe's work may have led him into dangerous territory. Unfortunately, the brothers hadn't stayed in close contact in recent years. That distance leaves Jack with very little knowledge about what Joe had been investigating before his death. Later, Jack checks into a small hotel room to rest while Roscoe keeps an eye on things from outside. But the quiet moment doesn't last long. 4 men hired by Kleiner Jr. soon arrive, intent on attacking him. Jack initially tries to avoid confrontation, but when the thugs begin hurling bottles at him, he's forced to defend himself. Within seconds, the fight is over, and all 4 attackers are left sprawled across the ground, completely incapacitated. That same night, somewhere else in town, the individuals responsible for Joe's murder prepare for their next move. Dressed in full body armor, they enter a house under the cover of darkness. The following morning, Jack notices something odd while walking through the neighborhood. A dog stands nearby looking extremely thirsty. Its owner claims he had already given the animal water, but the container beside it is bone dry, with no trace of moisture. The detail immediately raises Jack's suspicions. Moments later, Roscoe arrives with alarming news. Police Chief Morrison has been found murdered. When Jack hears this, he suddenly recalls something Paul had once said. His bosses had threatened to hang him if he refused to cooperate with their illegal schemes. Based on that memory, Jack predicts exactly what they are about to see. As he and Roscoe enter Morrison's home, Jack's grim prediction proves accurate. The police chief's body has been nailed to a wall in a horrifying display. Examining the scene, Jack quickly concludes that Morrison, and likely several other officers, had been involved in a bribery operation. At some point, Morrison must have resisted or attempted to back out. For that betrayal, he was brutally executed. The situation is now far more serious than it first appeared. The criminals behind these killings aren't ordinary thugs. They are powerful individuals with deep influence throughout the town. Recognizing the danger, Jack warns both Finlay and Roscoe to keep a close watch on Officer Stevenson and a man named Baker. Afterward, Jack and Roscoe return to check on Paul Hubbell's family. Paul himself is still missing, and his wife is increasingly terrified about what may have happened to him. Roscoe stays behind to protect the family, while Jack joins Finlay to continue the investigation. The 2 men take Paul's car and drive to a garage connected to the case. Inside, Jack spots a suspicious bag labeled Axis Financial. Curious, he opens it and retrieves a small penknife hidden inside. As the investigation deepens, it becomes increasingly clear that corruption has spread throughout Margrave. Trust is becoming a rare commodity. Adding to the suspicion, the town's mayor, Groove, suddenly appoints himself as acting chief of police. The unusual decision only raises more questions about whether the mayor himself might be entangled in the web of bribery and criminal activity surrounding the murders. As news of the murders spread through Margrave, the town itself became deeply divided. Some residents began questioning the leadership of Mayor Groove, suspecting corruption behind the scenes, while others directed their suspicion toward Jack, wondering why a stranger had suddenly arrived in their quiet community just as the killings began. In the middle of this growing tension, a prominent local businessman named Kleiner publicly stepped forward. At a press gathering, he boldly declared that he believed Jack Reacher was innocent. Kleiner even offered financial support to assist in solving the murders. Despite his confident and somewhat arrogant demeanor, it was clear that he had personal reasons for wanting the truth uncovered. One of the victims had been his own brother, making the investigation deeply personal for him. Meanwhile, the investigation itself continued to grow more complicated. Detective Finlay approached Mayor Groove to request permission to study the pattern connecting the recent killings. He hoped that by examining the similarities between the crimes, they could identify whoever was responsible. However, the mayor surprised him by insisting that the murder of Police Chief Morrison had nothing to do with the earlier cases. Instead of pursuing the broader connection, Finlay was instructed to focus on digging through Morrison's old records and reviewing files on previously arrested criminals. While Finlay reluctantly followed the mayor's instructions on the surface, Jack began developing his own suspicions, particularly about Kleiner. From Jack's experience, individuals with enormous wealth and influence often had secrets worth hiding. To him, Kleiner's sudden willingness to help might not be as generous as it appeared. Behind the scenes, Finlay and Roscoe quietly continued their own investigation, while also ensuring the safety of Paul Hubbell's family. Finlay reached out to someone he trusted deeply, his longtime friend Picard, an FBI agent based in the Atlanta branch. Their friendship stretched back years, and Picard had once even advised Finlay against accepting a job in Margrave. Because of that history, Finlay believed Picard could be trusted to assist discreetly. Mayor Groove, however, had a different idea. He suggested that Jack should simply leave town and return to wherever he came from. But Jack had already made up his mind. He wasn't leaving Margrave until the people responsible for his brother's death were brought to justice. Around this time, the elderly barber once again crossed paths with Jack and passed along a strange piece of information. Two Spanish-speaking men had apparently been asking around town about him. This happened shortly after Finlay had purchased Jack a cell phone, making the situation even more suspicious. Concerned that Paul Hubbell's family might be in danger, Jack rushed back to Paul's house. There, he instructed Paul's wife, Charlene, to pack her belongings quickly and prepare to move somewhere safer under the protection of an FBI agent. When Jack suggested that Paul was likely already dead, Charlene was shocked and devastated, but Jack believed it was the most probable outcome. During their time in prison, Paul had become a target. While standing outside the house, Jack noticed a bicycle nearby. The sight unexpectedly pulled him into a memory from childhood, one he shared with his brother Joe. In that memory, the two of them had confronted a group of teenagers who were bullying a young boy named Billy. Jack had nearly gotten into a fight with the bullies, but the situation diffused when Billy's parents arrived. Snapping back to the present, Jack suddenly noticed a suspicious vehicle parked near the house. Alarm bells immediately went off in his mind. He rushed back inside to secure Charlene. When a man approached the property, Jack quickly grabbed Roscoe's gun and pointed it toward the stranger. Fortunately, the man turned out to be Picard, the FBI agent Finlay had contacted. With his arrival, Charlene's safety was finally secured. Still determined to uncover the truth, Jack next turned his attention to the prison warden, Spivey. Jack believed the warden held an important piece of the puzzle. Using a clever trick, Jack phoned Spivey while pretending to be Detective Finlay and arranged a meeting. But Spivey was already suspicious. Instead of walking into Jack's trap, he set one of his own. As Jack arrived at the meeting location, he was suddenly ambushed by two armed men. They attempted to force him into the trunk of their car. But Jack refused to squeeze into the cramped space, knowing he was far too large for it. As the men struggled to push him inside, Jack seized the opportunity to fight back. In a rapid burst of action, he managed to overpower both attackers. Despite being outnumbered, Jack quickly neutralized them, leaving them incapacitated until a passing police officer arrived to arrest the men. Jack was then taken back to the station, where Roscoe treated the injuries he had sustained during the fight. While analyzing the encounter, Jack noticed several important details about his attackers. They spoke Spanish, carried Glock 17 pistols, and moved with the discipline of trained soldiers. From these clues, Jack suspected they might be current or former military personnel, possibly from South America. During this time, Roscoe uncovered another critical piece of information. Joe Reacher hadn't been working for Homeland Security as originally believed. He had actually been assigned to a division connected to the Secret Service. Finlay began connecting the dots. If Joe had been investigating financial crimes and Paul Hubbell specialized in currency management, then the larger operation might involve counterfeiting. In his mind, everything started to point toward money. Drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and even human trafficking often revolved around the same central motive: profit. With his injuries treated and his determination renewed, Jack prepared to continue the investigation. His next target was Spivey's home, where he believed more answers might be waiting, but Finlay stopped him. He insisted that he would handle the search himself. To prevent Jack from interfering, Roscoe was assigned the difficult task of distracting him. She suggested they take a short trip to a cafe across the Alabama border to clear their minds. During the drive, the tension between them softened. For the first time since the investigation began, Jack and Roscoe allowed themselves to relax. Their growing friendship became clear as they talked openly on the road. However, their journey was interrupted when border officers stopped their vehicle. Expecting trouble, Jack quietly prepared his gun. But instead of questioning them, the officer simply explained that the road ahead had been closed due to severe rainfall and the threat of flooding. They were advised to turn back. With the storm intensifying, Jack and Roscoe found themselves spending the night at a roadside motel. For the first time, they shared personal stories about their pasts. Roscoe revealed that after her parents died, she had been raised by her father's closest friend, a police officer named Gray. He had mentored her and taught her everything she knew about law enforcement. Sadly, Gray had struggled with depression and had taken his own life the year before. Despite that pain, he had always maintained a small tradition, bringing Roscoe Easter flowers every year on her birthday. The next morning, Jack drove Roscoe back to her house. But the moment they arrived, they knew something was wrong. The front door was slightly open, and there were clear signs that someone had forced their way inside. Carefully searching the house, they found no one, but they did discover a chilling message left behind. "See you later." It was a clear warning. Whoever was behind the murders had now begun targeting Roscoe as well. Realizing how dangerous the situation had become, Jack insisted she needed a weapon for protection. Roscoe's expression hardened with anger rather than fear. She had worked alongside both the FBI and the CIA and refused to be intimidated by criminals. Still understanding the risk, she retrieved a sleek firearm that had once belonged to Gray and handed it to Jack, ensuring they would both be ready for whatever came next. When Jack and Roscoe arrived at the hospital morgue, the coroner, Jasper, met them at the entrance. He had already completed the preliminary examination of the newest victim. The body belonged to Pete Jobling, a truck driver who worked for a shipping company tied to regional transport operations. Jasper explained that toxicology results had revealed unusually high levels of hydrogen sulfide in Jobling's bloodstream, suggesting he had been exposed to a dangerous chemical before his death. On the surface, Pete didn't appear to be the kind of man who would end up involved in something criminal. His background check revealed no serious offenses, only a few minor traffic violations, and one incident where he had resisted a police officer during a routine stop. Still, something about the circumstances surrounding his death felt suspicious. The situation became even stranger when the investigators discovered that an elite defense attorney, Zachariah Spurs, had recently taken on Jobling's legal case. For a simple truck driver with a minor record, hiring such a high-profile lawyer seemed completely out of place. Not long afterward, Roscoe received a call from Molly Bate Gordon, an employee working within the Secret Service Administration in Washington, D.C. The news she shared was devastating. Molly had just learned that her boyfriend, Joe Reacher, had been killed. Joe had kept much of his work secret from her. Only after he was promoted to director of the investigative division and placed in charge of the anti-counterfeiting department did she begin to understand the importance of his assignments. During his career, Joe had been responsible for shutting down numerous domestic counterfeiting rings and holding multiple companies accountable for producing fake currency. Recently, however, he had shifted his focus toward larger international operations that were far more complex. Jack asked Molly for help retrieving Joe's case records. She agreed and began printing every investigation Joe had worked on. As Jack carefully studied the documents, a pattern slowly emerged. Every trail eventually led back to one central motive: money. That realization immediately made him think of Paul Hubble. Paul had worked as a currency manager for Axis Financial in Atlanta. If Joe had been tracking a major counterfeiting operation, Paul's position within the financial system might have placed him dangerously close to the truth. Around the same time, Jack arranged a meeting with Zachariah Perez, the prominent attorney representing Pete Jobling. Jack visited the lawyer's office hoping to obtain a file related to one of Jobling's traffic violations. At first, Perez refused to cooperate. The conversation quickly turned tense as Jack pressed him for the documents. The lawyer responded with arrogance, warning Jack that a single phone call from him could destroy Jack's life. Jack didn't back down. Calmly but firmly, he replied with a threat of his own, one that made it clear he wasn't intimidated. After a long and uncomfortable standoff, Perez finally relented and handed over the file. Meanwhile, Detective Finlay had his own rough experience. After being mistakenly identified as a thief, he had been detained and roughed up by two officers who didn't recognize him. When Roscoe arrived to pick him up from the station, she was furious. She immediately reprimanded the officers for their careless mistake. Later that evening, Jack, Roscoe, and Finlay met at a diner to review the information they had gathered. During the discussion, they confirmed that Pete Jobling had been employed by Kleiner Industries. What puzzled them, however, was why the company had paid for such an expensive lawyer to defend a truck driver. Finlay soon uncovered another troubling detail. Prison warden Spivey had placed a phone call to Kleiner Industries shortly before the events surrounding the murders began. That discovery raised serious questions. Finlay began to suspect that Kleiner's company might be connected to a large counterfeiting operation, or possibly involved in forging official documents. To get closer to the truth, Finlay believed they needed to investigate the company more thoroughly. Jack, however, had a far more direct idea. His plan was simple: break into the Kleiner facility and search for evidence. Finlay immediately rejected the idea. In his view, breaking into private property without authorization would only destroy their case and turn them into criminals themselves. The disagreement quickly escalated into a heated argument between the two men. Before things got out of control, Roscoe stepped in and managed to calm both of them down. After a moment, the tension eased and the investigation resumed with a clearer head. As they continued driving through town, Jack suddenly remembered the dog he had seen earlier, the one that had been left thirsty outside a house. He stopped briefly to check on it again. When confronted, the man caring for the animal admitted the dog actually belonged to his late uncle and that he was only watching it temporarily. Eventually, Jack and Finlay made their way to Kleiner Industries. To their surprise, the facility appeared unusually unprotected. They noticed something odd right away. There were no visible security cameras monitoring the property. Inside the loading area, workers were busy transporting large containers filled with animal feet, an unusual product that raised even more questions. Moments later, a woman approached them and politely escorted them inside the building to meet Kleiner himself. As Jack entered the lobby, he immediately noticed several mounted animal heads displayed on the walls. The decorations told him something about the people who owned the company. The Kleiners were clearly avid hunters, and judging by the precision of the trophies, they were probably skilled marksmen as well. Soon they came face to face with Kleiner. Finlay wasted no time confronting him. He asked about the phone call Warden Spivey had placed to Kleiner Industries and demanded an explanation for Pete Jobling's death, since the man had once worked as a truck driver for the company. Kleiner remained calm as he responded. According to him, Pete had simply been an ordinary employee, nothing more. There was no special connection between them. The reason the company hired an expensive lawyer, he claimed, was simply because Kleiner Industries believed in protecting its workers legally whenever trouble arose. As for Spivey's phone call, Kleiner dismissed it casually, suggesting the warden might have had acquaintances within the company and had merely contacted the office number. Finlay wasn't convinced. Sensing the detective's frustration, Kleiner's tone shifted. He began boasting about everything he had done for Margrave, how his family's money had built the town and supported its development. Then he turned his attention directly toward Finlay. With a mocking smile, he pointed out that Finlay was a Harvard graduate who had ended up working as a small-town police officer. Kleiner suggested that it might be wiser for Finlay to simply close the case and move on. That remark pushed Finlay past his limit. Furious, he warned Kleiner that no one had the authority to interfere with his investigation, and that anyone who tried would regret it. Standing nearby, Jack watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, he saw Finlay fully commit himself to the fight. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the Kleiner family had grown used to pushing people around without consequences. To him, they looked like powerful bullies who had never truly been challenged, and who still believed they were untouchable. The thought stirred an old memory from his childhood. Years earlier, two Marines had arrived in town to investigate the beating of Curtis Bishop, a teenager who had been tormenting a boy named Billy. In truth, Jack had been the one responsible for the beating. But Joe had stepped forward and taken the blame, shielding his younger brother from punishment. It was just another reminder of how often Joe had protected him. Back in the present, Jack's instincts told him that the danger around them was growing. He urged Roscoe and Finlay to leave their homes and relocate somewhere safer. After what had happened to Chief Morrison, Jack refused to take any chances with their lives. When Roscoe arrived at Finlay's house, Jack explained another detail that had been bothering him. the amount of animal products being delivered to Kleiner Industries seemed suspicious. The shipments, particularly the cattle-related goods, far exceeded what the number of cows in the area could realistically produce. Roscoe, however, pointed out that in Georgia, cattle farming was extremely common, and large shipments weren't necessarily unusual. Still uneasy, Jack and Finlay decided the next day to stay at a motel instead of returning home, hoping to avoid any potential attacks from the powerful figures they were investigating. At the same time, Jack was determined to track down Warden Spivey, believing he held a crucial piece of the puzzle. Jack planned to look for him at a place known as the Blue Cat or gather information about where he might be hiding. While Jack and Finlay stayed back at the motel, Roscoe headed to a nearby mini-market to pick up food and supplies. There, she unexpectedly ran into Kleiner Jr. He approached her with a smug expression and revealed that he had been closely monitoring both her and Jack. Then he dropped a disturbing accusation. According to him, Jack had a dark past in Baghdad, one that allegedly involved the killing of innocent civilians. Kleiner Jr. claimed that Jack had escaped prosecution only because of his powerful connections within the military. In his eyes, Jack Reacher wasn't a hero, he was a murderer. He warned Roscoe that she would be wise to distance herself from him. Roscoe listened without showing any emotion. When he finished speaking, she simply walked away, unimpressed by the attempt to manipulate her. Later that day, as Jack prepared to leave a bar where he had been asking questions, he noticed a vehicle following him. The behavior immediately raised his suspicions. Before driving off, he briefly returned inside to retrieve his gloves, an instinctive precaution, then sped away. He drove out toward a quiet, isolated area before abruptly stopping and slipping out of the car. Taking cover in the tall grass, he waited. Moments later, two Spanish-speaking men stepped out of the vehicle that had been tailing him. They began scanning the area, searching for him. Jack didn't wait for them to make the first move. He struck quickly, firing before the men could react. Within seconds, both attackers were down. Once he was certain they were no longer a threat, Jack put on his gloves and carefully collected the spent shell casings, making sure no evidence remained behind. While searching one of the bodies, he discovered a thick bundle of cash. Then he opened the trunk of their car. Inside, he found something even more shocking, the freshly dead body of Warden Spivey. Judging by the condition of the corpse, the man had been killed only a few hours earlier. Not long afterward, Jack arrived at another location where a burned vehicle had been discovered. Finlay contacted him around the same time to discuss the situation. As Jack approached the charred car, he felt a troubling suspicion that it might belong to Joe. Unfortunately, the vehicle's license plate had been destroyed in the fire, making identification nearly impossible. When Roscoe joined them, the three investigators carefully examined the remains of the car. The plate was covered in a thick layer of burned residue, completely obscuring the numbers. Drawing on an old trick he had learned during his time in the military, Jack mixed ketchup with a small amount of acetic acid. Marines had once used this improvised solution when they ran out of oil to clean metal equipment. Applying the mixture to the plate, he slowly wiped away the residue. Gradually, the numbers began to appear. Finlay realized that to fully trace the vehicle they would need access to a more advanced database, so he contacted Picard for assistance. During the conversation, Jack explained to Finlay what had happened earlier, the attack by the two South American gunmen and the discovery of Spivey's body in the trunk. Finlay asked the obvious question, why had Jack killed them? Jack answered calmly. According to him, it had been self-defense. With Roscoe's help, they decided to dispose of the bodies quietly to avoid triggering a larger investigation by state authorities. But while examining the wounds, Roscoe noticed something troubling. The gunshots had entered from behind, not from the front as Jack had originally implied. Realizing she had caught the discrepancy, Jack admitted the truth. He had chosen to strike first before the men could attack him. Roscoe couldn't help remembering the accusations Kleiner Jr. had made earlier. That prompted her to ask Jack directly about what had really happened in Baghdad. After a moment of silence, Jack finally told the story. At the time, he had been searching for a missing person in a troubled neighborhood. Nearby, children often played soccer in an abandoned hangar. One evening he noticed something strange. The kids who normally returned home every night had suddenly stopped appearing. Concerned, Jack went to investigate. Inside the hangar, he found three local men harassing and intimidating the children. Jack confronted them and gave them a choice: turn themselves in to the authorities or face the consequences of their actions. The story lingered in Roscoe's mind as they continued driving. Later, the two of them devised a plan to dispose of the bodies hidden in the attacker's car. After disabling nearby CCTV cameras and carefully navigating through airport security checkpoints, they managed to park the vehicle in a remote corner of the airport parking lot where it was unlikely to attract attention. While they worked, Jack shared another suspicion. He believed Kleiner might be using the profits from illegal operations to purchase access, buying influence, information, and protection wherever it was needed. Eventually, Jack and Roscoe checked into a luxurious hotel room, paying for the stay with the cash Jack had taken from the assassins. Even there, Jack refused to relax completely. As a precaution, he wedged a toothpick into the door hinges, an improvised alarm that would break if anyone tried to enter the room while they slept. Not long after settling into the hotel, Jack received a call from Molly Bate. She had managed to gather the information he had asked for and had taken precautions to make sure no one could track her movements. To stay safe, Roscoe suggested that Molly travel by train and meet them the following day at 5 Point Station. During the call, Molly spoke emotionally about Joe. She explained that she and Joe had been together for 2 years and that he had often talked about his younger brother. According to her, Joe admired Jack deeply. He believed Jack was brilliant, though occasionally stubborn enough to frustrate everyone around him. The conversation left Jack quiet and reflective. The reality of losing Joe weighed heavily on him. Roscoe could see the pain behind his calm expression and tried to comfort him. That night, the two of them allowed themselves a rare moment of closeness, sharing a quiet and romantic evening that briefly pushed the chaos of the investigation into the background. The following morning, their focus returned to the case. Jack and Roscoe decided to visit Pete Jobling's address to learn more about the truck driver's life. When they arrived, however, they discovered that the house belonged to Pete's parents. Not wanting to alarm them, Jack approached the conversation carefully. He told Pete's mother that there had been a series of thefts involving trucks at the company where Pete had worked, and he was simply asking a few routine questions to gather information. The explanation seemed to reassure her. She mentioned that Pete hadn't been living there for quite some time. Instead, he had been staying with his wife in another house. Despite the sadness Jack felt when thinking about his brother's murder and the growing number of victims connected to the case, he kept his emotions tightly controlled. Letting those feelings surface wouldn't help solve anything. Meanwhile, across town, Mayor Groove summoned Detective Finlay for a private meeting. The mayor had heard about Finlay's confrontation with Kleiner and was clearly unhappy. Unknown to many, Groove himself had accepted bribes from Kleiner, and he treated the wealthy businessman with near reverence. He sternly warned Finlay not to interfere with Kleiner again. Instead, he ordered him to focus on investigating former convicts who might have held grudges against Chief Morrison. To make matters worse, Groove informed him that from now on every action he took would require the mayor's approval. If Finlay stepped out of line, his career in Margrave could end immediately. Soon after leaving the meeting, Finlay received a message from Picard using a coded signal they had previously agreed upon. The message instructed him to reach a location labeled 2S3 billion within the hour. When Finlay arrived, Picard reassured him that Paul Hubbell's family was safe. He had left them under the protection of a trusted agent named Charlie, and had even handed over his own gun to ensure their safety while he stepped away briefly. At the same time, Jack and Roscoe tracked down Pete Jobling's actual residence, a large and well-furnished house. Pete's wife, Judy, answered the door. Her reaction to Pete's death surprised them. She showed little grief, explaining bluntly that Pete had always known the risks associated with his line of work. According to her, he had been stealing air conditioners from Kleiner's operations in Miami and reselling them. Inside the garage, Jack and Roscoe found stacks of empty air conditioner boxes, confirming that Pete had indeed been involved in theft. While they were still examining the property, Jack received a call from Finlay asking him to meet at the location Picard had specified. On the drive there, Jack began connecting new pieces of the puzzle. He suspected Pete had been involved in a counterfeiting scheme run through Kleiner's network. In his theory, fake money was being produced in South America and shipped into Florida. Pete's role might have been to transport the counterfeit bills hidden inside shipments, possibly concealed in those empty air conditioner boxes. It was only a theory for now. To confirm it, they would need to examine the files Molly was bringing with her. When they reached the rendezvous point, Picard guided them to a secure area, clearly cautious about being followed. Once everyone was gathered, he revealed new information. The burned car they had discovered earlier belonged to a man named Ron Hassey, a man who used multiple aliases, including the name Joe. That confirmed Jack's suspicion. The vehicle had indeed been connected to his brother. Picard handed Jack a slip of paper containing the address of a hotel where Joe had been staying before his death. He told Jack to memorize the location immediately and destroy the paper afterward to prevent anyone from tracking their investigation. When Jack and Roscoe finally reached the hotel, they encountered another obstacle. Someone had already removed Joe's luggage from the room nearly 20 minutes earlier. Still, Jack refused to give up. He began searching the surrounding area, convinced that Joe might have left behind some kind of clue. His instincts paid off. In a nearby trash bin, he found a piece of clothing that had clearly been discarded intentionally. Inside one of the pockets was a small note. Written on it were two short messages: Pete's Garage and Grace Kleiner File. Before they could fully process the discovery, gunshots suddenly erupted around them. Assassins had arrived and opened fire without warning. Jack and the others quickly scattered to avoid the bullets. The attackers seemed especially focused on Jack, likely believing he carried the key to whatever message Joe had left behind. During the chaotic chase that followed, Jack's car became trapped, forcing him to confront one of the hitmen directly. In the struggle that followed, Jack managed to eliminate the attacker. The second assassin continued pursuing him, and the two engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. The battle was fierce, and for a moment it looked as though Jack might be overwhelmed. Then a gunshot rang out. Roscoe had arrived just in time, shooting the assassin from behind and ending the fight. Once the danger passed, Roscoe's anger quickly surfaced. Furious that Jack had once again thrown himself into a deadly situation, she slapped him in frustration. Beneath the anger, however, was genuine fear for his safety. Later, Finlay came to a troubling conclusion. Someone must have leaked the location of the hotel. His suspicion fell on Officer Stevenson, who may have intercepted their earlier phone call with Picard. Jack soon found evidence supporting that theory. Inside Spivey's abandoned car, he discovered sophisticated surveillance equipment. The criminals had likely been listening to their conversations using satellite dish microphones, meaning the enemy had been monitoring their every move. For a brief moment, Jack's thoughts drifted back to another moment from his past. As a child, he had once been falsely accused of striking the son of a powerful general. In truth, Jack had only defended himself during the altercation. But the general refused to accept that explanation. Instead, he held a grudge against both Jack and his father, going as far as attempting to have Jack's father demoted and transferred overseas to Germany. The memory reminded Jack that powerful people often use their influence to bend justice to their will. Shaking off the memory, Jack returned to the present. He and the others had gathered inside a house, trying to decipher the clues left behind in Joe's belongings. The note they had recovered from Joe's clothing contained several sets of initials and phone numbers, cryptic fragments like PHWB and SC that clearly meant something, but were difficult to interpret at first glance. One detail stood out to Jack. The number 901 caught his attention immediately. During his time serving with the Air National Guard in Memphis, he had become familiar with the area code. It belonged to that region. Determined to follow every possible lead, the group split up the tasks listed on the note. Jack placed a call to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, hoping to learn whether Joe had contacted someone there before his death. Roscoe attempted to reach William Brandt, an economics professor at Princeton who was returning from a conference in Europe. Meanwhile, Finlay tried to get in touch with the dean of the economics department in Columbia, as well as a professor named Stefani Castillo, another academic who had attended the same conference and was expected to return home within a few days. Even with these calls underway, Jack believed the investigation might reach beyond universities and government offices. In his experience, corrupt officials within federal agencies could pose an even greater threat than criminals themselves. To help dig deeper, he contacted an old and highly trusted ally, Francis Neagley, a former colleague from his military days. Jack asked Neagley to look into the Environmental Protection Office located in Memphis, particularly anyone connected to the initials, JW. If Joe had been investigating something there, it could reveal an important link. Later, Jack, Roscoe, and Finlay headed to the airport train station to meet Molly Bate Gordon, who was bringing Joe's files with her. But when they arrived, something felt wrong. Molly was nowhere to be seen. Their fears quickly turned into panic when they discovered that the bag containing Joe's documents had been emptied. Following signs of a struggle nearby, Jack rushed ahead and found Molly lying on the ground, gravely wounded and covered in blood. She had been murdered before she could deliver the information. With Molly gone, the team lost one of their most important sources of information about Joe's investigation. Her death also revealed something deeply troubling. The criminal network they were pursuing was not only powerful, but also extremely organized. Whoever was behind the operation had the ability to track informants quickly and eliminate them without hesitation. Jack and the others began to suspect that corruption might reach far deeper than they initially believed. Some members of the Margrave police force, and possibly even certain federal agencies, could be secretly cooperating with the criminal organization. Later, while driving through town, Jack suddenly spotted a dog lying weakly on the side of the road. Finlay immediately understood why the sight caught Jack's attention and pulled the car over. Upon closer inspection, they saw that the chain around the animal's neck had been tightened painfully. When the owner appeared, Jack's patience snapped. Furious at the cruelty, he punched the man and decided to take the dog away from him. The moment oddly lightened the mood between Jack and Finlay. Roscoe couldn't help but smile as she watched the two men working together with a level of trust that hadn't existed earlier in the investigation. After arranging for the dog to be taken somewhere safe, Finlay drove Jack back to Paul Hubbell's house so they could retrieve another vehicle. Their previous car had been riddled with bullet holes during the earlier attack and was no longer usable. Jack eventually selected a sleek replacement car and then made a brief detour to inspect Klainer's ranch property. Something about the place continued to bother him, especially the enormous quantities of cattle feed being purchased by the Klainer operation. The supplies were far beyond what the ranch's herd could realistically consume. As Jack returned to his car, he noticed something else that immediately caught his eye, the same type of seeds he had previously found stuck to Paul's shoe. Their presence confirmed that Paul had once been at the Klainer ranch. Back at the police station, Jack noticed Roscoe scrubbing graffiti off their damaged car. Klainer Jr. and his gang had vandalized it. The sight filled Jack with anger. Without hesitation, he stormed off to confront Klainer Jr. directly. He found him at a local diner and began taunting him openly. Jack accused him of bullying women and hiding behind his father's wealth like a spoiled child. The confrontation quickly escalated. Despite being outnumbered, Jack fought back against Klainer Jr. and his group, overpowering them with ease. One by one, the men were knocked down as Jack defended himself in a display of controlled but overwhelming force. Just as the situation reached its peak, Finlay and Roscoe arrived at the diner with their weapons drawn. They were prepared to intervene when they saw Klainer Jr. brandishing a knife toward Jack. Before things could spiral further, Klainer himself stepped in and ordered everyone to stand down. Finlay clearly disliked taking direction from him, but the tension eventually eased. Roscoe escorted Jack outside afterward. During the walk, Jack admitted something rare for him. Roscoe had become someone he truly cared about, not just a partner in the investigation. Unfortunately, another setback arrived soon after. Roscoe received a call from Mayor Groove. Because of her involvement with Jack and Finlay's unofficial investigation, she was being removed from her position. She had just been fired. Despite the chaos at the diner, Jack managed to avoid legal trouble from the altercation. Klainer clearly didn't want the situation dragged into court, where Jack would have an opportunity to defend himself publicly. With the investigation continuing to unravel, Jack became more convinced than ever that the Klainer empire sat at the center of the conspiracy. Determined to prove it, he began examining the company's employee records and financial documents, hoping to uncover the evidence that would expose the entire operation. While digging deeper into the mystery, Jack also considered another possibility. Perhaps Roscoe's late adoptive father, Gray, had unknowingly left behind a clue connected to the case. Jack began examining the weapons Gray had once owned. As he sorted through a box of firearms and equipment, he noticed something unusual, a small hidden compartment tucked inside the case. Opening the miniature drawer, he discovered a key carefully concealed within it. Around the same time, Jack learned that Gray had maintained a weekly habit of visiting Mosley's barber shop. Hoping the shop might hold additional clues, Jack paid a visit himself. Mosley remembered Gray well and revealed that the old officer had left behind a large box years earlier, asking the barber to keep it safe. Inside that box, Jack found documents and handwritten notes that provided more insight into Klainer's cattle ranch. One particular detail immediately stood out. Official records showed that the ranch only maintained about 116 cows, yet the amount of cattle feed being purchased was far greater than what such a herd could possibly consume. The discrepancy sparked Jack's curiosity. It looked like Klainer might be deliberately maintaining just enough livestock to remain under the threshold that would trigger stricter government inspections and reporting requirements. Roscoe initially grew frustrated with Jack's relentless focus on the ranch, but the theory reminded her of her uncle, who had once owned a herd of similar size. Even so, something still didn't add up. If Klainer was intentionally underreporting the number of cattle he owned, why would he still need such enormous quantities of feed? As Jack continued reviewing the financial records that Gray had preserved, he uncovered something even more troubling. The expenses listed in the documents didn't match the company's declared income. Large sums of money had been moving through accounts with no legitimate explanation. To Jack, it looked like Klainer had been funneling funds into the town itself, likely bribing certain residents and officials in order to protect his secret operations. Despite uncovering these irregularities, one question still bothered Jack. Why had Kleiner chosen Margrave as the center of his activities? The answer slowly became clear. Margrave's location made it the perfect distribution hub. The town sat near old state routes while still providing easy access to major federal highways. It was the kind of place where shipments could move quietly in multiple directions without drawing much attention. Jack began forming a larger theory. If counterfeit money was being smuggled into the country, Kleiner would need a secure inland base where the currency could be stored and distributed. The murders of undercover agents and the destruction of evidence might have been carried out specifically to prevent authorities, possibly even the Coast Guard, from interrupting the flow of fake currency entering the United States. If that was true, the organization likely had significant financial assets overseas. Those funds could be vulnerable to seizure by authorities, which meant the criminals had strong motivation to eliminate anyone investigating the operation. Such resources could even be used to destabilize economies or fund dangerous weapons if left unchecked. Meanwhile, Roscoe made a discovery of her own. While reading through one of Gray's old journals, she found evidence suggesting that his death might not have been a suicide after all. For years she had believed that Gray had accidentally fallen and struck his head on a chair, but the diary hinted at something darker. The story briefly drifted back to another moment from Jack's youth. After the earlier incident involving the general's son, both Jack and Joe had been ordered by their parents to apologize. Joe reluctantly did so to keep the peace. Jack, however, refused. Convinced he had done nothing wrong, he stubbornly insisted that the boy who had been bullying others deserved an even harsher lesson. That same night in the present, Jack received an urgent call from Neagley. She had uncovered something important but refused to discuss it over the phone. Without delay, Jack traveled to Memphis to meet her. They arranged to meet near the hotel where she was staying. Neagley, now successful in the private security sector, had built a comfortable life for herself and was staying in a luxury suite. The two met at a quiet restaurant before taking a walk through a nearby park. Jack admitted he was concerned that their enemies might still be using parabolic microphones or other surveillance equipment to monitor his conversations. Neagley then revealed the discovery she had made. The initials JW listed in Joe's notes referred to a man named Jimmy Dupree-Willix, an investigator working for the Environmental Protection Agency. Not long ago, Jimmy had been found shot dead in his own home. Officially, the FBI had labeled the case a botched robbery, but Neagley had examined the details more closely. The weapon used was a 9mm handgun, and the victim's body had also shown signs of severe beating. The similarities immediately struck Jack. Jimmy's murder closely resembled the circumstances surrounding Joe's death. Neagley advised Jack to speak with Memphis police officer Auken and a potential informant who might know more about Jimmy's case. According to her sources, the investigation had been tied to environmental contamination along the Mississippi River. The situation involved powerful individuals and a dangerous criminal network, so she warned Jack to proceed carefully. Back in Margrave, Roscoe continued examining the circumstances surrounding Gray's death. She asked to see the official photograph taken of his body. The report had claimed he died after falling and striking his head on a chair. But when Roscoe looked closely at the wound, something didn't feel right. The injury had a distinctive diamond-shaped pattern, something that didn't match the edge of a chair. Meanwhile in Memphis, Jack and Neagley met with an informant near a reservoir where the man spent much of his time fishing. The fisherman explained that the water in the reservoir had become dangerously polluted over the past year. He suspected the contamination came from a wealthy chemical company called Clarin Chemical. Digging further, Jack discovered that Clarin Chemical had already been shut down. Even more suspicious, the company had once operated as a subsidiary of Kleiner Industries. Returning to Margrave, Jack and Neagley pieced together a disturbing conclusion. Kleiner had likely arranged the murders of both Jimmy Willix and Joe Reacher to prevent them from exposing the environmental pollution tied to his operations. Determined to pursue the lead, Jack and Neagley arranged to meet with Officer Auken and his partner Ribidox. Back in Margrave, Roscoe confronted Mayor Groove after realizing something shocking. The decorative cane he constantly carried, with its diamond-shaped tip, perfectly matched the wound on Gray's skull. Overcome with anger, Roscoe punched the mayor. Finlay, who witnessed the confrontation, quickly pulled her away before things escalated further, knowing she could be in serious danger. Later that evening, Jack, Neagley, Auken, and Ribidox met an informant at a nightclub. The man admitted he didn't know the identity of the federal agent connected to the case, but he did know one detail. Among criminals, the mysterious investigator had been referred to by a single nickname, Viking. Meanwhile, worried that Mayor Groove might retaliate against Roscoe, Finlay secretly moved her to a small motel far outside the town where she could remain hidden until the situation became clearer. Roscoe soon called Jack, telling him she wanted to confront Mayor Groove before the entire investigation was quietly buried. As she spoke, Neagley happened to overhear the conversation. It didn't take her long to notice the growing emotional connection between Jack and Roscoe, something Jack himself seemed reluctant to admit. Before they could move forward with their plans, everything suddenly spiraled out of control. Without warning, Ribidox turned on his own partner. In a shocking act of betrayal, he shot and killed Officer Auken. Jack and Neagley reacted instantly. Knowing Ribidox would be hunting them next, they abandoned their vehicle and pushed it into a nearby river to eliminate any trace of their escape. Realizing they would have a better chance of uncovering the truth separately, they decided to split up. Jack would return to Margrave to continue the investigation there, while Neagley stayed behind in Memphis to gather more information about the mysterious figure known only as Viking. Back in Margrave, Detective Finlay made a bold move of his own. One evening, he secretly entered Kleiner Industries' headquarters, hoping to uncover files that might expose the company's illegal activities. Instead, he stumbled upon something far more shocking. Inside Kleiner's office, the wealthy businessman sat slumped over in his chair, dead. Blood covered the desk and floor around him. The sight made one thing immediately clear to Finlay: Kleiner himself had been murdered. The discovery changed everything. If Kleiner was dead, then he couldn't have been the true mastermind behind the criminal network. Someone far more powerful and far more dangerous had been operating behind the scenes. The next day, Finlay showed Jack a photograph taken at the crime scene. Jack studied the wound on Kleiner's neck carefully. Almost immediately, he recognized the technique. It was known as the Venezuelan butterfly, a brutal cut that causes rapid blood loss while making it nearly impossible for the victim to breathe. Finlay began speculating that Kleiner might have been working with criminal groups from Venezuela and that the partnership had somehow turned violent. If so, the killing might have been the result of betrayal within the organization. Whatever the truth was, one thing had become clear: their earlier belief that Kleiner was the mastermind behind everything had been wrong. The real leader of the operation was still out there. Finlay returned to police headquarters, pretending he had no knowledge of Kleiner's death. Mayor Groove assigned him to investigate the murder, while temporarily putting the Morrison case aside. As Finlay prepared to leave, he ran into Kleiner Jr., who was furious over the accusations previously directed at his father. The younger man threatened him, clearly looking for revenge. After witnessing the confrontation, Groove decided to send Finlay home for several days to cool things down. Meanwhile, Jack visited a repair shop to have his car windows tinted so it would be harder for anyone to identify him while he moved around town. Since the process would take a few days, he paid the owner extra money and borrowed another car to use temporarily. While waiting for Jack, Finlay stopped by Mosley's barbershop. The two men shared some tomatoes while talking. Finlay wondered aloud why Mosley had chosen to remain in Margrave despite the danger spreading through the town. Mosley simply replied that he intended to live and die in the place he had always called home. Then Mosley turned the question back on him. Why would a Harvard graduate like Finlay choose to work in such a small, isolated town? Finlay avoided answering directly. Instead, he brushed the question aside, saying it was none of Mosley's business. Meanwhile, at the safe house, Picard escorted Roscoe to check on Charlene and her children. Before leaving, he reminded Charlene to follow strict safety precautions: lock both doors, keep the lights off at night, and avoid using the fireplace so their location wouldn't be revealed. Not far away, Jack and Finlay positioned themselves on a hill overlooking Kleiner's factory. While keeping watch, Jack casually stole some of Finlay's snacks and absent-mindedly played with his wedding ring. During the quiet stakeout, Finlay finally revealed something deeply personal. Despite what people believed, he was not divorced. His wife Sharon had died from a terminal illness. Jack was surprised. Finlay explained that he had never corrected people who assumed his marriage had failed. Allowing others to think he was bitter and unpleasant was easier than accepting their sympathy. Since Sharon's death, he had kept only one habit sacred: paying his phone bill so he could still hear her voice on the voicemail recordings she had left behind. Jack suddenly understood many things about him. Living above a tobacco shop while trying to quit smoking, choosing a remote town like Margrave, and maintaining a reputation as a stubborn, angry man, all of it was part of the way Finlay coped with his loss. While they were talking, they noticed Kleiner's nephew climbing into a box truck. Jack suspected the vehicle might be carrying counterfeit money, especially now that transporting it had become more difficult due to increased Coast Guard patrols. At the safe house, Roscoe spent time talking with Charlene. She shared her own painful past, explaining how her parents had died in a car accident when she was a child. She had survived only because she had been sitting in the back seat. While looking out the window, Roscoe suddenly spotted the faint beam of a flashlight in the darkness. Someone was watching the house. She immediately warned Charlene that if she heard Roscoe scream, she should grab the children and run into the forest. Meanwhile, Jack and Finlay followed the box truck as it left Margrave and headed toward Tennessee. Back at the house, Roscoe quietly approached the two men hiding outside. But as she moved through the trees, she accidentally stepped on a branch, alerting them. Gunfire erupted. Roscoe managed to shoot one of the attackers in the leg, slowing him down. The second man prepared to throw a grenade, but she reacted quickly enough to stop him before he could do it. At the same time, Jack and Finlay watched as the truck finally stopped outside a roadside motel. While the driver and the motel clerk slept inside, the two investigators seized the opportunity to inspect the vehicle. Their search nearly failed when Klainer's nephew stepped outside unexpectedly to check on the truck. Jack and Finlay hid just in time, barely avoiding detection. When they finally opened the truck, however, they found nothing inside. It was completely empty. As Jack stood there thinking, a troubling realization struck him. Earlier, two professors had been scheduled to arrive in the United States for a conference, the same individuals whose names had appeared in Joe's notes. Jack immediately called one of them, Professor William Brandt. The response he received was chilling. Brandt had been murdered earlier that morning. Without wasting a second, Jack contacted the second professor, Castillo. Speaking urgently, he warned the man that his life was in danger and instructed him to follow Jack's directions carefully if he wanted to survive. Meanwhile, at dawn, Roscoe guided Charlene and her two children through the forest as they attempted to reach Picard in the center of town. When one of the children injured her leg along the way, Roscoe gently lifted the girl into her arms and carried her, refusing to leave anyone behind. While Roscoe escorted Charlene and the children through the forest, Jack headed toward another critical meeting. His destination was a safe location where he planned to meet Professor Stefani Castillo, the last academic connected to Joe's investigation who was still alive. During their journey, Roscoe stopped at a small tavern so Charlene's injured daughter could rest. The girl's feet had been badly scraped during their escape through the woods, so Roscoe carefully wrapped them with ice to reduce the swelling. While they waited, Roscoe finally decided to be honest with Charlene. She revealed something she had uncovered during the investigation. Paul had never truly left his job at Axis Financial, despite claiming that he had resigned more than a year earlier. To Roscoe's surprise, Charlene already knew the truth. Charlene admitted that Paul had become involved with Klainer long before the investigation began. She had kept the secret hidden to protect their children. According to her, Klainer had approached Paul with an extremely tempting offer, an assignment in Venezuela where he would supposedly study the financial structure of one of Klainer's overseas operations. The salary Klainer offered was impossible to ignore. It was 4 times higher than Paul's current pay, along with a promise of a massive 50% bonus at the end of the year. Paul accepted the offer without hesitation. For a time, everything appeared legitimate. Paul helped coordinate currency transfers connected to Klainer's business operations, and Klainer seemed pleased with his performance. But eventually, the truth came out. During a visit to a horse breeding farm owned by Klainer, where champion horses were raised, the businessman finally revealed the reality of the operation. The money Paul had been transferring wasn't legitimate at all. It was counterfeit. Klainer openly admitted that his organization had been producing fake currency and laundering millions of dollars through international channels. Every transaction Paul had helped process, every email, digital record, and financial transfer could be traced back to him. If the authorities ever uncovered the scheme, Paul would face decades in prison. By then, it was already too late for him to walk away. Charlene described the terrifying moment when Paul realized the trap he had fallen into. One night, he had been locked inside the stables of Klainer's farm and forced to witness the brutal punishment of another man who had tried to resist Klainer's orders. The man was executed in front of him in a horrifying display of violence meant to send a message. From that moment on, Paul understood that he had no choice but to obey. Not long afterward, Picard arrived to escort Roscoe, Charlene, and the children to a safer location. Even he seemed disturbed by how quickly their enemies had discovered their hiding place. Meanwhile, Jack sat in the back of a taxi, studying the clues Joe had left behind. The phrase Pete's Garage and the reference to the Grace Klainer files continued to circle in his mind as he tried to decode their meaning. Dressed in a fresh suit to avoid drawing attention, Jack made his way toward the police station. As he approached the building, he sensed that someone might be watching him, but he pushed the thought aside and continued inside. Almost immediately, he noticed a detail that caught his attention. The boots worn by one of the officers on duty, the way they were laced, and the style of the trousers told Jack something important. This man had military experience. Jack approached the officer, introducing himself under the cover of being a lawyer. The officer's name was Sergeant Diaz. Jack explained that he needed to speak with Professor Stefani Castillo, who had been placed under police protection after receiving threats against his life. After some hesitation, Diaz allowed Jack to meet with the professor. Inside the protected room, Castillo confirmed that he had been working closely with Joe before the agent's death. Castillo and another academic had been among the few specialists in the United States with the expertise to detect large-scale counterfeiting operations across international financial systems. Their work had focused specifically on global currency manipulation. Castillo explained that the criminal network Joe had been investigating was far more dangerous than most people realized. Nearly 80% of U.S. $100 bills circulated outside the country in underground markets connected to illegal activities, drug trafficking, arms sales, and human smuggling. Criminal organizations preferred American currency because of its stability and its reputation as a reliable store of value. For decades, counterfeiters had attempted to reproduce the dollar using increasingly sophisticated techniques, replicating holograms, copying printing dyes, and exploiting weaknesses in the paper used to print the notes. Joe had been working on a strategy to stop them. His plan involved controlling the production of a highly specialized paper used exclusively in the printing of U.S. currency. The material required strict government authorization, and only one company in the country had legal permission to produce it. But Joe had discovered that another company in Georgia was secretly attempting to manufacture the same paper illegally. When Jack heard that detail, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Kleiner Industries wasn't simply transporting counterfeit money from overseas, they were manufacturing it themselves. Before leaving, Jack warned Professor Castillo to remain inside the police station until he returned. The professor's knowledge made him a valuable witness and a prime target. Jack promised him one thing: whoever was responsible for the murders would be found. As he stepped out of the room, Jack turned back to Sergeant Diaz and asked about his military background. The man confirmed that he had once served as a first lieutenant in the Army. Jack then revealed his own identity. He wasn't a lawyer at all. He was Jack Reacher, retired major from the Marine Corps Special Investigations Unit. Jack explained that he was simply trying to do the right thing. Too many people had already died in this investigation: police officers, federal agents, and even his own brother. Sergeant Diaz understood immediately. As a fellow soldier, he agreed without hesitation to help protect Professor Castillo. But as Jack exited the police station, he sensed movement behind him. Someone was following him. He quickly turned down a narrow alley and waited in the shadows. When the pursuer entered the alley moments later, Jack moved fast, grabbing the man and slamming him against the wall. A brutal struggle erupted between them. The fight was violent and chaotic. In the middle of the clash, Jack felt the sudden sting of a blade as the attacker slashed him across the stomach. Despite the deep cut in his stomach, Jack managed to overpower his attacker in the alley. The fight ended with Jack standing over the man, victorious but wounded. Once again, someone had tried to silence him, and once again they had failed. That same night, Officer Stevenson sat at home with his wife, discussing the growing wave of murders spreading across Margrave. The string of killings had begun to terrify her. Several of the victims were people they personally knew: colleagues, superiors, even acquaintances from their social circle. She begged Stevenson to consider leaving the city before it was too late, but they never got the chance. Outside their home, 4 ruthless killers dressed in protective gear quietly approached the house, ready to eliminate both of them. Meanwhile, Jack's mind drifted back to another chapter of his childhood. Years earlier, his father had been reassigned to Germany. The move had forced Jack and Joe to leave everything behind and relocate to a place that felt dull and unfamiliar to them. The culture was quieter and more reserved than what they were used to. Fortunately, their mother had helped them adjust. She was thoughtful and wise, guiding both boys through the transition. Joe quickly developed a reputation for his sharp mind and analytical skills, while Jack stood out for something different: his physical strength, which seemed to surpass that of other boys his age. The memory faded as Jack returned to the present. Detective Finlay arrived soon afterward to pick him up, and Jack immediately shared what he had learned from Professor Castillo, including the attempted assassination carried out by Venezuelan operatives. As chief detective, Finlay felt obligated to attend Kleiner's funeral, despite the businessman's rumored ties to organized crime. The ceremony was tense from the start. During the service, Klainer's son Dawson publicly accused Finlay of murdering his uncle. The accusation was outrageous, but Finlay responded coldly. If Dawson continued spreading lies, he warned, there might soon be 2 members of the Klainer family in the cemetery. After leaving the funeral, Jack and Finlay headed toward the repair shop where Jack's vehicle was being worked on. Along the way, Jack noticed a mechanic attempting to hide an oil spill by spreading cat litter across the floor, a small detail, but one that caught his observant eye. Just as they arrived at the shop, Finlay received devastating news. Officer Stevenson and his wife had both been murdered. The crime scene resembled the earlier killing of Chief Morrison, suggesting the same group was responsible. Jack quickly developed a theory. The killers weren't simply executing people, they were punishing them. Stevenson had likely been forced to watch as his wife was tortured before suffering the same fate himself. The presence of mirrors at the scene supported that grim possibility. Jack believed the murders were connected to Dawson discovering the damage done to the delivery truck they had previously investigated. Now the killers were targeting people close to Finlay in hopes of uncovering what the investigators knew. With this in mind, Jack arranged a meeting with the last remaining police officer in Margrave, Officer Baker. They met for lunch, where Baker appeared strangely unaffected by the news of Stevenson's death. Instead of mourning his partner, he devoured his meal with disturbing enthusiasm. Jack decided to test him. Pretending to trust Baker more than the other officers, Jack began feeding him carefully crafted lies. He even suggested that Finlay might secretly be the serial killer responsible for the murders. Jack explained that he had only pretended to be Finlay's ally in order to uncover the truth about his brother's death. Then he revealed his supposed plan, to search Paul Hubbell's house that night for evidence. If he found anything important, he claimed, he would bring it directly to Baker. The officer appeared to accept the story completely. After the meeting, Jack prepared for what he knew was coming. He purchased military-style equipment, combat clothing, survival knives, and special powder that could be used for tactical purposes. Then he headed to Paul's house and waited. Jack was certain Dawson and his men would come after him. Even as a storm rolled across the sky, his prediction proved correct. A vehicle soon pulled up outside the house carrying several armed men. Jack struck first. He eliminated the driver immediately to prevent anyone from escaping. Then, using one of the combat knives he had brought with him, he silently took down another attacker. Moving through the darkness, he ambushed a third man from behind. That left only Dawson and one final accomplice. A brutal fight followed. During the struggle, Jack was thrown into a nearby swimming pool and nearly drowned. But he managed to regain his footing, retrieve his weapon, and continue the battle. In the end, Dawson fell. Before finishing him, Jack forced the answers he had been searching for. Later, Jack contacted Roscoe and shared what he had learned from Professor Castillo. Joe had never uncovered a counterfeit paper operation after all. The criminals had been using a far more ingenious method. Instead of printing fake money from scratch, they were erasing the ink from genuine $1 bills using a powerful chemical solution. Once the paper was blank again, they simply reprinted the bills with a higher denomination, transforming them into $100 notes. Because the paper itself was authentic government-issued currency, the counterfeit bills were nearly impossible to detect. Paul Hubbell's role had been to collect massive quantities of $1 bills from places like casinos and parking attendants. Those stacks of currency were then transported to Margrave hidden inside livestock feed delivery trucks. The chemical process used to strip the ink-created toxic waste, which had been dumped into the Mississippi River, triggering the environmental investigation that Joe and the EPA agent had begun pursuing. That was why the Environmental Protection Agency investigator had been murdered. The cattle ranch had been nothing more than a cover. The animal feed being shipped into the ranch was actually converted into a chemical solution strong enough to wash the ink from the bills. Once cleaned and reprinted, the new $100 notes were loaded onto trucks and sent to Florida before being smuggled overseas, eventually reaching Venezuela. The counterfeit bills worked because they were printed using the design of older U.S. currency from before the 1990s, making them extremely difficult to detect in international circulation. Now Jack and his allies had one final goal. They needed hard evidence that would link Kleiner Industries directly to the counterfeiting operation. Soon afterward, Roscoe contacted Picard to inform him that Jack had made a major breakthrough. Jack then reached out to Finlay and instructed him to head immediately to Pete Jobling's house, the next step in exposing the entire operation. Shortly after Jack warned Finlay to arm himself, the detective began to sense that something was wrong. 3 unfamiliar men had appeared nearby, watching him far too closely. Realizing an attack might be imminent, Jack quickly called him and gave urgent instructions. He reminded Finlay that he was staying in a room at the Jasmine Hotel and explained something important about the building itself. The dividing wall between the rooms was made from thin plywood panels, cheap material that could easily be broken through. Jack told him to turn the television up to full volume to mask the noise. Then, using the distraction, Finlay smashed through the flimsy wall and slipped into the neighboring room before the attackers could reach him. Thanks to Jack's quick thinking, Finlay managed to escape the assassination attempt unharmed. Early the next morning, Jack and Finlay drove to Pete Jobling's house hoping to uncover additional evidence. But when they arrived, they were met with a grim sight. The entire property had been burned to the ground. The fire was clearly intentional, a desperate attempt to destroy anything that might expose the criminal operation. During the drive, Jack finally admitted something he had kept to himself. He had killed Dawson and 4 of his men the previous night. The confrontation had been unavoidable. While examining Joe's notes again, Jack suddenly noticed something he had overlooked before. The phrase referencing Jobling might not have been referring to Pete himself, but to Pete's parents, Jobling Sr. They searched the garage area carefully, and Jack eventually discovered a crate marked with the Kleiner Industries logo. Inside were stacks upon stacks of counterfeit bills, millions of dollars worth. The discovery was explosive. Jack instructed Finlay to contact Picard immediately and arrange a meeting at the Kleiner ranch house. If the evidence was handled correctly, it would be enough to bring down the Kleiner Foundation and expose Mayor Groove's involvement as well. Jack planned to deliver the money directly to Bentley, ensuring the case couldn't be buried. While they were on their way to the ranch, Jack received another call from Neagley with critical new information. She had continued investigating the murder of the Environmental Protection Agency agent. The case had originally been handled by an FBI agent named Nitmo, who had dismissed it as a simple robbery. But Neagley's background check uncovered something suspicious. Nitmo possessed far more wealth than his government salary could explain. Digging deeper, she discovered something even stranger. The agent known by the nickname Viking, the same figure connected to the case, had actually died from cancer 3 years earlier. However, Viking had once worked with a partner in the FBI who was still active. That partner was Picard. The truth became painfully clear. Picard had been involved with the criminal operation all along. In fact, the entire conspiracy revolved around 3 men, Kleiner Jr., Mayor Groove, and FBI agent Picard. Each of them had betrayed their positions of authority in pursuit of enormous wealth through the international counterfeiting scheme. Soon after, Kleiner Jr., known as KJ, revealed just how ruthless he truly was. He showed Jack a video recording of Roscoe, Charlene, and Charlene's children being held hostage. Then he presented Jack with an ultimatum. If Jack wanted them to live, he had to bring Paul Hubble to them. If he refused, Roscoe would suffer the same fate as Chief Morrison. The demand wasn't random. Because of a Coast Guard blockade, a shipment of counterfeit money had recently been lost. Their Venezuelan clients were already expecting payment, and the criminals needed Paul alive to continue the operation. But the revelations didn't stop there. KJ confessed to something even darker. The person who had murdered Kleiner was not an outsider. It was KJ himself. Believing his father had grown weak and might jeopardize the criminal empire, KJ had killed him to seize control of the operation. He had also ordered the murders of several key figures: the EPA investigator in Memphis, Pete Jobling, Molly Bate Gordon in the subway, and even Joe Reacher. Jack struggled to keep his anger under control, as KJ described how Joe had been beaten even after he was already dead. Kleiner had once discovered KJ and Dawson's involvement in the murder of Police Chief Morrison. The revelation had nearly pushed him to send his own son to a psychiatric institution, but he ultimately couldn't bring himself to do it. Meanwhile, Mayor Groove had been preparing an even more sinister plan. He intended to frame both Jack and Joe as the masterminds behind the crimes. Fabricated evidence would portray Joe as being involved in drug trafficking and illegal weapons deals, while Jack would be accused of bribing local police. Now Jack had only 24 hours to find Paul. Picard, pretending to assist him, stayed by his side during the search. Their first stop was Jack's favorite coffee shop. Jack ordered his usual black coffee and a slice of peach pie while studying a map spread across the table. He carefully analyzed possible places where Paul might hide. Eventually, he narrowed the search to the Augusta area. Paul would likely stay close enough to keep watch over his family. Picard listened, but remained skeptical. At the same time, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Picard might be waiting for the perfect opportunity to eliminate him. That suspicion intensified moments later. As a waitress placed their drinks on the table, Jack deliberately bumped his arm against the cup, spilling hot coffee across Picard's pants. While Picard reacted in surprise, Jack quickly grabbed a cake fork and punctured the tire of their car outside. Even with the damaged vehicle, they continued driving toward Augusta. Elsewhere, Finlay had his own crisis to deal with. Officer Baker, now revealed as one of KJ's allies, ambushed him and beat him severely. Back on the road, the warning light on Jack's dashboard eventually signaled the flat tire. Jack pulled over and began changing it while Picard watched him closely. Suddenly, Jack made his move. He launched himself at Picard, and the two men began fighting beside the road. In the struggle, Picard was shot, but before Jack could confirm the kill, the man's body vanished into the surrounding brush. Despite the uncertainty, Jack continued moving. Using Google Maps, he began scanning for motels within a 5-kilometer radius of Augusta's bus terminal. His reasoning was simple. Paul would avoid using credit cards that could be traced. Eventually, Jack located the most likely hiding place. Meanwhile, back at Kleiner Industries, the counterfeit operation continued running at full capacity. Mayor Groove moved Charlene's children into a locked room so the criminals could carry out the rest of their plan without interruption. Jack, however, had already reached the final piece of the puzzle. Because Paul had little cash and couldn't risk electronic transactions, he had been forced to travel by bus. Under the alias Harrison, he had checked into a room at the Jasmine Hotel, exactly where Jack expected to find him. When Jack returned to Paul Hubbell's property, he found the place in ruins. The aftermath of the earlier confrontations had left the house damaged and scattered with debris. Jack had come back for a specific reason. He wanted to recover the truck Dawson had used during the attack on him near police headquarters. That vehicle might still hold clues about the operation. At the same time, Baker, who had captured Finlay, suddenly received a message on Finlay's phone: "Get down and take cover." The warning came from Jack. Jack had already begun executing a bold plan to break into the detention center and free Finlay. Moments after the message appeared, chaos erupted outside. A truck crashed through the area during the assault, killing Baker instantly. In the confusion that followed, Jack managed to reach Finlay and cut him free. Together, they gathered weapons and prepared for the final confrontation with the people behind the conspiracy. Before long, Neagley joined them as well. The team now had the strength and the determination they needed for the final battle. That night, Jack, Finlay, Paul, and Neagley gathered at Mosley's house to map out their plan. Spread across the table were diagrams and maps of Kleiner Industries. After carefully studying the layout, they pinpointed the section of the facility where Roscoe and Charlene were likely being held captive. According to Paul, the criminals had separated his children deliberately, forcing Charlene to cooperate with them under threat. With the plan finalized, the group moved into action. Neagley positioned herself at a distance with a sniper rifle, giving her a clear view of the facility's guards. From that vantage point, she could provide cover fire while the others infiltrated the compound. Jack carried a gallon of gasoline with him. His idea was simple: create a diversion large enough to distract the guards and allow them to move inside unnoticed. Paul, desperate to rescue his family, armed himself and prepared to fight alongside them. The operation began the moment Neagley fired the first shot. As one guard fell, Jack quietly eliminated another who had begun to suspect movement near the perimeter. Finlay, standing beside him, lit a cigarette, possibly his last, accepting the very real chance that he might not survive the night. Then Jack ignited the gasoline. The explosion ripped through part of the compound, throwing the criminals into complete confusion. Kleiner Jr. and the men guarding the operation were caught entirely off guard. Gunfire erupted immediately. Neagley provided precision shots from above while Jack and Finlay advanced into the building, taking down enemies in close combat. Amid the chaos, Paul managed to locate his children and guide them towards safety. Inside the facility, the battle intensified. Finlay fought his way through several armed men while Jack pushed deeper into the building. Eventually, Jack reached the room where Roscoe and Charlene were being held. With a quick slice of his knife, he cut through the restraints binding them. Charlene rushed to reunite with her children the moment she was free, while Neagley continued to cover the group from her sniper position. Elsewhere in the factory, another confrontation unfolded. Picard, who had survived the earlier encounter with Jack, reappeared. He faced Finlay in a brutal fight that ended with Finlay finally shooting him, bringing an end to the corrupt FBI agent's betrayal. At the same time, Roscoe confronted Mayor Groove. Having discovered that he was responsible for the death of her adoptive father, she refused to let him escape justice. The corrupt mayor met his end during the confrontation. By then, nearly everyone had escaped the building. Only Jack and Kleiner Jr. remained inside. KJ tried to ambush Jack, attacking him from behind when he thought the moment was right, but Jack had anticipated the move. The two men clashed in a brutal final fight that pushed both of them to their limits. In the end, Jack defeated him. The man responsible for Joe's murder and for countless other deaths was finally gone. Moments later, a massive explosion shook the factory as the operation collapsed around them. Jack narrowly escaped the blast and emerged outside, where Roscoe rushed forward and embraced him with relief. Later that night, Jack and Roscoe shared a quiet moment together. As they lay side by side, Jack's thoughts drifted back to a painful memory. Years earlier, Joe had called him back to Germany because their mother was dying. Joe had asked Jack to stay strong and not cry in front of her. Their mother had refused to travel to the United States for treatment. She told them that seeing her sons grow into honorable men was all the peace she needed. In her final moments, she revealed something Jack had never known. She had always been aware that Jack, not Joe, had struck the general's son years earlier. Joe had taken the blame to protect him. Before she passed away, she gave Jack a medal that had once belonged to his grandfather. To her, it symbolized courage and the importance of always choosing what is right. That was the first time Jack had ever cried. Back in the present, Jack and Roscoe shared one final emotional conversation in the quiet streets of Margrave. Law enforcement agencies, including federal investigators, were already on their way to question Jack about everything that had happened. But Jack had never been the type to stay in one place for long. He planned to disappear once again. Roscoe, however, chose a different path. Inspired by everything that had happened, she decided to run for mayor. She wanted to rebuild the town and honor the sacrifices made during the fight to expose the truth. Before Jack left, the two shared a heartfelt goodbye. Meanwhile, Finlay made a decision of his own. He adopted the dog Jack had rescued earlier and named it after his friend. After spending one last evening together at the local tavern, the two men parted ways. Finlay returned to Boston, ready to begin a new chapter in his life, the kind his late wife would have wanted him to live. Jack, as always, continued wandering. Before leaving the area entirely, he visited a quiet place connected to his past and buried the medal his mother had given him, a symbolic farewell to the memories that had shaped him. With that, Jack Reacher set out once again on the open road. The story leaves behind a simple but powerful message. Doing the right thing is rarely easy. Greed and power can corrupt even those sworn to protect others. Yet in the face of those temptations, it is still possible to choose integrity over selfish ambition and to fight for justice, no matter the cost. Analysis. What if a man walked into your town, and within a few hours, everything started to fall apart? No loud entrance. No dramatic introduction. Just a tall stranger stepping off a bus, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back. But here's the twist: by the end of the day, that same man is sitting in a jail cell, accused of murder. This is how Reacher 2022 begins. And from that very first moment, the story grabs you and refuses to let go. The series introduces us to Jack Reacher, a former military investigator who lives a life most people couldn't imagine. He owns almost nothing, travels from town to town, and avoids attention whenever possible. But trouble has a strange way of finding him. When Reacher arrives in the quiet town of Margrave, Georgia, the locals immediately see him as an outsider. And when a brutal murder shakes the town, the police quickly decide he must be the culprit. But the deeper they dig, the more something doesn't add up. Because this quiet stranger is not just another suspect. He's observant. He's calculating. And he knows things about crime scenes that even trained detectives miss. Soon the police realize something unsettling. The man they arrested might actually be the only person capable of solving the case. What begins as a simple murder investigation slowly transforms into something much bigger, a hidden network of corruption, lies, and powerful people who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. And standing directly in their path is Jack Reacher. In this video, we're going to break down everything about Reacher 2022, from the story and hidden details to the themes, facts, and the explosive ending. So if you enjoy crime mysteries, brutal action, and intelligent storytelling, you're in the right place. Because once Reacher enters town, someone is going to regret it. Before we dive deep into the mystery, the action, and the secrets hidden inside this story, let's first understand what Reacher 2022 actually is. Because at first glance, the premise sounds surprisingly simple. Reacher premiered in 2022 as an action-crime thriller series and quickly became one of the most talked-about shows on streaming platforms. The series is based on the hugely popular Jack Reacher novels written by Lee Child, a book series that has sold millions of copies worldwide. But instead of feeling like just another crime show, Reacher combines several genres at once. It's part detective mystery, where clues slowly reveal a much larger puzzle. It's part crime thriller, exposing a dangerous network of corruption. And it's also a full-blown action series, packed with brutal fights, tense confrontations, and moments where intelligence matters just as much as strength. The story takes place in a quiet American town called Margrave, Georgia. At first glance, Margrave looks peaceful. The streets are calm, the people seem friendly, and life appears ordinary. It's the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. But as we quickly learn, appearances can be dangerously misleading. The story begins when a mysterious traveler named Jack Reacher steps off a bus and enters this small town with no clear destination and no luggage. Within hours of arriving, something shocking happens. Reacher is arrested for a murder he didn't commit. From that moment, the situation begins to spiral. What initially appears to be a simple investigation slowly uncovers something far more disturbing, a web of secrets, corruption, and powerful individuals hiding behind the town's peaceful image. And strangely enough, the man accused of the crime might be the only person capable of uncovering the truth. Because Jack Reacher is not just another traveler passing through town. He's a former military investigator, trained to notice details others miss, and when something doesn't add up, he refuses to walk away. What follows is a story filled with suspense, investigation, and explosive confrontations as one man begins to dismantle a conspiracy hiding in plain sight. And that's where the real story of Reacher truly begins. Now on the surface, Reacher, 2022, might look like a straightforward action show, a big, intimidating guy beating up criminals and solving crimes. But if you look closer, the series is actually built on several powerful layers of storytelling. First, at its core, Reacher is a crime mystery. The story begins with a single murder, but that crime quickly becomes a gateway to something much larger. Every episode reveals new clues, new suspects, and deeper secrets hiding inside the town of Margrave. It's the kind of investigation where nothing is exactly what it seems, and every answer raises even more questions. But the show doesn't stop there. It also works as a high-stakes thriller. The deeper Reacher digs into the case, the more dangerous the situation becomes. Powerful people are involved. Secrets have been buried for years. And the moment someone starts getting close to the truth, things start getting violent. Which brings us to another key element of the show, raw, physical action. Unlike flashy action heroes who rely on gadgets or complicated fight choreography, Jack Reacher fights in a way that feels brutally realistic. Every punch is calculated. Every move is efficient. When he enters a fight, it's not about style, it's about ending the threat as quickly as possible. But beneath all the action and investigation lies the most important theme of the series, justice. Jack Reacher lives by a very clear moral code. He believes that the system is supposed to protect people. But when corruption spreads through that system, someone has to step in and make things right. And Reacher has absolutely no problem being that person. Another powerful theme running through the story is corruption hiding in plain sight. Margrave looks like a peaceful small town where everyone knows each other. But the deeper the story goes, the more we see how easily power and greed can twist a community from the inside. People who appear trustworthy turn out to be dangerous. Institutions meant to protect the public hide dark secrets. And sometimes the only person willing to confront that corruption is an outsider with nothing to lose. The tone of the series reflects these themes perfectly. It's gritty. It's intense. And it constantly reminds the viewer that justice doesn't always come through official channels. Sometimes it arrives on a bus. And it looks like Jack Reacher. As the investigation reaches its final stage, the quiet town of Margrave begins to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. What started as a single mysterious murder has now exposed something far bigger, a carefully hidden criminal empire operating right in the heart of the town. By this point in the story, Jack Reacher and his allies have connected the dots. The murders, the suspicious financial activity, the corrupt officials, it all leads back to a sophisticated counterfeit money operation that has been running for years. And the most shocking part, some of the most powerful and respected figures in Margrave are directly involved. People who were supposed to protect the town were actually controlling the entire criminal network. But once Reacher uncovers the truth, the criminals realize their time is running out. And when powerful people feel cornered, they become even more dangerous. What follows is the final and most intense confrontation of the series. Reacher refuses to let the conspiracy escape justice. Using both strategy and sheer physical force, he systematically dismantles the operation piece by piece. The men behind the scheme try to silence him, but they quickly realize something terrifying. They are not dealing with an ordinary opponent. Reacher doesn't intimidate easily. He doesn't negotiate with corruption. And once he decides someone deserves justice, he doesn't stop. One by one, the people responsible for the crimes are exposed. The truth finally surfaces, and the operation that controlled Margrave from the shadows collapses completely. But the ending of the story reveals something even more important about Jack Reacher himself. After everything he has done, after solving the case, exposing the conspiracy, and bringing justice to the victims, he doesn't stay to celebrate. He doesn't look for recognition. He doesn't accept rewards. And he certainly doesn't settle down. Instead, he does what he has always done. He simply lives. Reacher walks out of town the same way he arrived, quietly, alone, and ready to continue his journey somewhere else. Because for him, this was never about fame or heroism. It was about doing what needed to be done. And somewhere out there, another town probably needs someone exactly like him. Now here's something interesting about Reacher, 2022, that many viewers don't immediately notice. On the surface, the show looks like a straightforward crime thriller, investigation, action, and a hero taking down criminals. But if you pay closer attention, the series is actually packed with hidden clues, subtle symbolism, and clever foreshadowing that quietly guide the audience toward the truth. And some of these details are so subtle that most viewers completely miss them the first time. Let's start with one of the most important storytelling techniques the show uses, foreshadowing. From the very beginning, the series drops tiny hints that something in Margrave isn't right. Small details in conversations, strange reactions from certain characters, and inconsistencies in the investigation all suggest that the town is hiding a much bigger secret. At first, these clues seem insignificant. But as the story unfolds, those same details start to make sense, revealing that the conspiracy was always hiding right in front of everyone. Another interesting layer of symbolism appears in the way Margrave itself is portrayed. The town looks calm and welcoming, clean streets, friendly faces, and the appearance of a peaceful community. But this calm surface acts like a mask covering the corruption underneath. In many ways, Margrave represents a powerful idea. Evil doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes the most dangerous systems are hidden behind normal, everyday life. The show also hides clever references for fans of the Jack Reacher novels. Several lines of dialogue, character behaviors, and small details about Reacher's past are direct nods to the books written by Lee Child. These references reward longtime fans while still keeping the story accessible for new viewers. Even Reacher's personality carries symbolic meaning. He travels with almost nothing. No home, no possessions, no permanent attachments. This lifestyle reflects his role in the story. He moves through different places like a force of balance, stepping in only when injustice appears. He doesn't belong to any system, which means he also can't be controlled by one. And that idea becomes incredibly important in a story where powerful institutions themselves have become corrupt. So while Reacher delivers plenty of action and suspense, it also quietly builds a deeper layer of storytelling through these hidden details. The result is a show that becomes even more rewarding the second time you watch it, because suddenly you start noticing all the clues that were there from the very beginning. Now here's something that makes Reacher 2022 even more interesting. Behind the action, the investigations, and the intense fights, there are some fascinating facts about how this series was actually made, and some of them completely changed the way fans saw the character. First, the character of Jack Reacher didn't start on television. He originally came from a hugely successful novel series written by Lee Child. The first book was released in the late 1990s, and over time, the series grew into one of the most popular thriller franchises in the world. Millions of readers became fans of this mysterious drifter who solves crimes with a combination of intelligence, military experience, and raw physical strength. But when earlier film adaptations were released, many fans felt something was missing. In the books, Jack Reacher is described as an extremely tall and intimidating figure, someone whose physical presence alone makes criminals nervous. So when the creators decided to bring the story back as a television series, they wanted to stay much closer to the original description from the novels. That decision played a huge role in the casting process. The actor chosen to play Reacher went through intense preparation to fully embody the character's physical strength and disciplined mindset. The goal wasn't just to make him look powerful, it was to make him move and fight like someone who had spent years as a trained military investigator. Another interesting behind-the-scenes detail involves the fight scenes. Unlike many action shows that rely on flashy choreography or unrealistic stunts, the creators of Reacher wanted the combat to feel efficient and brutally realistic. Reacher doesn't fight to impress people, he fights to end threats quickly. So every punch, every movement, and every confrontation was designed to reflect that mindset. Fans of the novels will also notice that the show includes several subtle references to future stories in the Jack Reacher book series. These small hints suggest that the creators were already thinking ahead about expanding the story into multiple seasons. And that attention to detail is part of what makes the series feel authentic. It's not just another action show. It's a carefully crafted adaptation of a character who has already built a massive fanbase over decades, and for many viewers, Reacher 2022 finally delivered the version of the character they had been waiting to see. Now, one of the most interesting things about Reacher 2022 is how it fits into a long tradition of action and crime storytelling, while still feeling completely unique. Because the idea of a mysterious outsider arriving in a small town and exposing corruption isn't new. In fact, it's a classic storytelling formula that has been used in westerns, crime thrillers, and action films for decades. Think about it. A quiet town, a hidden criminal system, and a lone stranger who refuses to look the other way. This formula has appeared in countless stories, but Reacher brings a modern twist to it. Unlike many action heroes who rely on gadgets, technology, or big teams, Jack Reacher operates almost entirely on his own. His greatest weapons aren't just his strength, they're his intelligence, observation skills, and military training. He studies situations carefully. He notices details other people miss. And when the moment comes to act, he acts decisively. Another interesting comparison comes when we look at other detective-style crime shows. Many crime dramas focus heavily on investigation and courtroom drama. The pacing is slower, and the tension comes mainly from uncovering clues. But Reacher combines that detective mystery with explosive action. You get the satisfaction of solving a puzzle, while also watching a character who isn't afraid to confront criminals directly when necessary. There's also an important comparison within the Reacher franchise itself. Before the television series, the character appeared in earlier film adaptations. While those movies introduced audiences to the character, many fans of the books felt that the portrayal didn't fully capture the physical presence and personality described in the novels. The 2022 series was created with a clear goal: bring the character closer to the original version readers loved. And for many viewers, it succeeded. The show presents Reacher as both a brilliant investigator and an unstoppable force, creating a balance that feels true to the spirit of the books. That combination, intelligence, mystery, and raw action, is what ultimately sets Reacher apart from other shows in the genre. It's not just another crime story. It's a story about what happens when corruption meets the one person who refuses to tolerate it. When Reacher 2022 finally premiered, something interesting happened almost immediately. The show didn't just attract attention, it exploded in popularity. Within a short time of its release, the series climbed to the top of streaming charts and quickly became one of the most talked-about action crime shows of the year. Viewers around the world began discussing the character, the mystery, and especially the intense action scenes. But what made the response even more interesting was the reaction from fans of the original novels. For years, readers of Lee Child's books had imagined Jack Reacher in a very specific way: a massive, intimidating investigator who combines intelligence with brutal efficiency. And many of those fans felt that previous adaptations didn't fully capture that version of the character. This time, however, the reaction was very different. A large portion of the audience felt that the series finally delivered the Reacher they had imagined from the books. The character felt closer to the source material, both in personality and presence, which helped the show gain strong support from longtime fans. Critics also responded positively to several aspects of the series. Many praised the pacing of the story, noting that the mystery unfolds in a way that keeps viewers curious without becoming confusing. Others highlighted the balance between investigation and action, which prevents the show from feeling slow or repetitive. Another point that received praise was the atmosphere of the town itself. Margrave feels believable, a quiet community where corruption could realistically hide beneath everyday life. Of course, like any popular show, not every opinion was identical. Some critics felt the series leans heavily into traditional action tropes, while others believed certain side characters could have been explored more deeply. But even among those criticisms, most viewers still agreed on one thing: the show is incredibly entertaining. And perhaps the biggest sign of its success was how quickly it built a loyal fanbase eager to see what Jack Reacher would do next. Because once audiences experienced the story, the mystery, and the character, they weren't ready for it to end. REVIWS, what happens when one of the most famous characters in modern thriller fiction finally gets the adaptation fans have been waiting for? For years, readers of Lee Child's best-selling novels imagined Jack Reacher as a towering force of nature, a wandering ex-military investigator who could outthink criminals and outfight almost anyone who stood in his way. But bringing that character to the screen has never been easy. And when Amazon released Reacher in 2022, the question wasn't just whether the show would be good. The real question was, could this finally be the version that gets Jack Reacher right, Jack Reacher isn't just another action hero. Across more than 24 novels, Lee Child created a character who exists somewhere between detective, drifter, and quiet storm. Reacher travels light. No home. No possessions. Just a toothbrush and a sharp mind. He moves from town to town, rarely looking for trouble, but somehow always finding it. And when he does, the result is usually the same. Corruption exposed. Bad people broken. Justice delivered. It's a simple formula, but it works incredibly well on the page. The real challenge was translating that formula to the screen. Before the series arrived, audiences already had 2 Jack Reacher films. Those movies delivered slick action and solid storytelling, but they also created one huge controversy. Fans of the books never stopped pointing out one detail. Jack Reacher in the novels is enormous. A towering, intimidating presence who dominates a room the moment he walks into it. The film version looked different. And while the movies had their supporters, many readers felt that something fundamental about the character had been lost. So when Amazon announced a full television series, expectations were sky-high. This wasn't just another adaptation. It was a second chance. One of the smartest decisions the series makes is using the television format to its full advantage. Instead of squeezing the story into a 2-hour film, Reacher spreads the narrative across 8 episodes. That change makes a huge difference. Because a Reacher story isn't just about action. It's about investigation. Clues. Patterns. Hidden motives. In Season 1, the show adapts Lee Child's first novel, Killing Floor. The story begins when Reacher steps off a bus in the quiet town of Margrave, Georgia. Within minutes, he's arrested for murder. And from that moment, the mystery begins to expand. What starts as a single crime slowly reveals a much larger conspiracy, one involving corruption, criminal networks, and secrets buried deep inside the town. The longer format gives every twist room to breathe. Each episode uncovers another layer of the puzzle. And that pacing is exactly what the character needed. Another major strength of the series is how closely it respects the original novels. Many adaptations take beloved characters and completely reinvent them. But Reacher understands that the source material already works. Instead of rewriting the character, the show focuses on translating him faithfully to television. The personality, the intelligence, the quiet confidence, even the rhythm of the investigations. Lee Child himself was involved in the production, helping ensure that the character's quirks and identity remained intact. For longtime fans, that respect for the books becomes one of the show's biggest victories. At its core, the success of Reacher comes from something very simple. The show understands exactly what kind of story it wants to tell. It doesn't try to reinvent the thriller genre. It doesn't overload the story with complicated mythology. Instead, it sticks to the classic formula that made the books so addictive. A stranger arrives. Something feels wrong. And one man decides to fix it. That simplicity gives the series a confidence many modern shows lack. It knows its audience. And it knows exactly what they came to see. But adapting the story was only half the challenge. Because even with the perfect structure, even with the perfect mystery, there was still one crucial question left. Could the show finally find an actor capable of becoming Jack Reacher? Because without the right lead, none of this works. And that's where Alan Ritchson enters the story. The moment Alan Ritchson walks on screen as Jack Reacher, something immediately feels different. You don't need dialogue. You don't need exposition. You don't even need action. Because before he says a single word, the audience already understands one thing: this man looks like trouble. And for fans of Lee Child's novels, that moment matters more than you might think. For years, the biggest debate around Jack Reacher had nothing to do with story, action, or directing. It was casting. In the books, Reacher is described as a giant. 6'5", built like a linebacker. The kind of presence that makes people step aside in a hallway without even realizing why. That physical intimidation is part of the character's identity. It changes how every confrontation plays out. When someone decides to challenge Reacher, it already feels like a bad decision. Previous adaptations captured the attitude of the character, but visually, something always felt off. And that's why the moment Amazon announced Alan Ritchson as the new Reacher, fans immediately started paying attention. Alan Ritchson brings something to the role that had been missing before. Sheer physical dominance. He's tall, broad, built like a human battering ram. When he walks into a bar, a diner, or a police station, the room reacts. And that's exactly how the character is supposed to work. Reacher doesn't have to shout. He doesn't posture. He just stands there and people notice. The show uses that presence brilliantly. Often the tension in a scene comes from watching other characters slowly realize they may have just picked the wrong person to provoke. But the real test of the role isn't just whether the actor looks intimidating. Jack Reacher isn't just a fighter. He's also extremely intelligent. In the novels, he notices details others miss. Small movements, inconsistencies, patterns in behavior. He reads situations like a chess player studying the board. The show tries to capture that balance between brain and brawn. And Ritchson brings a calm, analytical energy to the character that helps sell those moments. When Reacher studies a crime scene or quietly pieces together a mystery, you can see the gears turning. It's not flashy. It's quiet confidence. One of the surprising things about Ritchson's performance is how much humor he brings to the role. Reacher isn't a talkative character. He's often blunt, socially awkward, completely uninterested in small talk. And that creates some genuinely funny moments. When criminals try to intimidate him, when someone threatens him, or when he calmly explains exactly how things are about to go wrong for them. The delivery is dry, almost casual, which somehow makes it even more satisfying when the inevitable fight begins. That said, not everyone agrees on the performance. Some viewers feel Ritchson can appear stiff in dialogue-heavy scenes. There are moments where his stillness reads as confidence, and moments where it feels slightly wooden. But even critics of the acting tend to agree on one thing. He looks like Jack Reacher. And in an action series built around a character who dominates every room he enters, that visual credibility carries enormous weight. Because at the end of the day, Reacher is built around one central figure. The mysteries change. The villains change. The locations change. But the show works only if the audience believes in the man at the center of it. The wandering drifter. The quiet observer. The unstoppable problem solver. Alan Ritchson may not be everyone's perfect version of the character. But his presence gives the series something it absolutely needed. A Reacher who finally looks like the one readers imagined for years. Of course, a strong lead alone isn't enough to carry an entire series. Because once Reacher steps off that bus, once the investigation begins, the real story starts to unfold. And that's where the mystery of Margrave, Georgia changes everything. A stranger steps off a bus. No luggage. No home. No clear destination. Just a toothbrush in his pocket and a name. Jack Reacher. Within minutes of arriving in a quiet Georgia town, he's arrested for murder. And just like that, the mystery begins. The story of Reacher starts in the fictional town of Margrave, Georgia. A place that looks calm on the surface. Small streets. Quiet diners. Friendly locals. But like many crime stories, the peaceful appearance hides something darker underneath. Reacher arrives with a simple purpose. He's looking into the past of a blues musician he admired. It should have been a quick stop. But instead of finding music history, he finds police lights, suspicion, and a jail cell. Because almost immediately, he becomes the prime suspect in a murder investigation. And from that moment, everything begins to unravel. What makes the premise so effective is how quickly the story escalates. At first, it looks like a misunderstanding. A stranger in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the deeper Reacher looks into the case, the clearer it becomes that something much bigger is happening inside Margrave. One murder leads to another. Then another. Soon the investigation begins pointing toward powerful people inside the town. Corrupt officials. Hidden criminal operations. And a network of secrets that has been operating quietly for years. Reacher realizes something important very early on. This town isn't just unlucky. It's infected. What separates Reacher from a typical action show is how much of the story functions like a detective mystery. Yes, there are fights. Yes, there are shootouts. But the real engine of the story is investigation. Reacher studies details others miss. Footprints. Body language. Small inconsistencies in people's stories. He pieces together clues like a puzzle. And every time he gets closer to the truth, the danger increases. Because the people behind the conspiracy start realizing something. The stranger they tried to frame for murder is actually the worst possible person they could have crossed. The decision to set the story in a small town is incredibly important. In a city, corruption can hide easily. But in a town like Margrave, everyone knows everyone. Which means when secrets start surfacing, they hit closer to home. Friends become suspects. Authorities become enemies. And the deeper the investigation goes, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Because the conspiracy isn't happening somewhere far away. It's happening right in the center of the town. As the series continues, the scope of the story expands. Later seasons move beyond the small-town mystery. New locations appear. Old military allies return. And the investigations become larger in scale. But the formula stays the same. Reacher arrives somewhere new. Trouble finds him. And a hidden system of corruption begins to collapse. It's a structure that works because it keeps the character moving. Reacher is never meant to stay in one place for long. He solves the problem, and then he disappears again. But while the mystery drives the story forward, Reacher doesn't solve it alone. Because once the investigation begins, he finds allies. Some reluctant, some determined, and some just as dangerous as the enemies they're hunting. And those relationships become one of the most important parts of the series. Jack Reacher may be the man who walks into town alone, but he never solves the case alone. Because every great crime story needs more than just a powerful hero. It needs allies, skeptics, partners, people who challenge the hero, and people who trust him when no one else will. And in Reacher, the supporting characters are exactly what keep the story grounded while chaos unfolds around them. The most important ally in Season 1 is Detective Oscar Finlay. At first glance, Finlay and Reacher couldn't be more different. Finlay is methodical, educated, precise. A Harvard graduate trying to maintain order in a small town that clearly doesn't want outsiders asking too many questions. And then Reacher arrives. A drifter, an ex-military cop, a murder suspect. Naturally, Finlay doesn't trust him. Their early interactions are tense, skeptical, sometimes even hostile. But as the investigation moves forward, something interesting begins to happen. Finlay realizes that this quiet stranger might actually be the only person capable of exposing the corruption surrounding them. Their partnership slowly evolves from suspicion to reluctant cooperation to mutual respect. And that dynamic becomes one of the strongest parts of the series. Then there's Roscoe Conklin. Unlike many crime dramas where the female lead is pushed into the background, Roscoe plays an active role in the investigation. She's deeply connected to the town of Margrave, which means the corruption Reacher uncovers isn't just a mystery for her. It's personal. Roscoe isn't just another police officer following orders. She's someone who refuses to watch her town fall apart. Her relationship with Reacher adds emotional depth to the story. Because while Reacher is used to drifting from place to place, Roscoe represents something he rarely allows himself to have. Connection. Roots. A reason to stay. And that contrast between them creates some of the show's most genuine moments. What makes these characters work so well together is how different they are. Reacher is instinctive and unpredictable. Finlay is analytical and cautious. Roscoe is driven by loyalty to her town. Each one brings a different perspective to the investigation. And together, they slowly uncover the truth behind the conspiracy in Margrave. But this partnership isn't smooth. They argue. They disagree. They question each other's decisions, which makes their alliance feel real. Because in a situation where no one knows who can be trusted, trust becomes the most valuable currency. As the series continues, the story introduces another layer to Reacher's world. His past. Later seasons bring in members of his former military unit, the Special Investigators. These characters reveal a side of Reacher that viewers didn't see in the first season. The lone drifter suddenly becomes part of a team again. Old friendships return. Shared history surfaces. And the audience begins to understand that Reacher wasn't always wandering alone. He once led a group of highly skilled investigators who trusted him completely. That shift changes the tone of the story. Instead of one man against corruption, the fight becomes something larger. a coordinated effort to take down threats far more dangerous than anything a single person could face alone. Without these characters, Reacher would be a very different show. It would simply be a giant hero beating up criminals every episode. Entertaining, sure, but shallow. Finlay adds intelligence and skepticism. Roscoe adds emotional weight. And the later team members reveal pieces of Reacher's past. Together, they make the world feel bigger than just one unstoppable man. They give the story stakes. They give the hero someone to protect. And sometimes someone to listen to. But even with a strong team around him, Reacher still operates in a very specific kind of world. A world where justice isn't always clean. Where humor appears in the middle of violence. And where brutal action somehow blends with surprisingly sharp wit. And that unique tone is exactly what makes the series stand out. There's a moment in Reacher that perfectly captures what this show is all about. A group of men surround him. They're confident. They're loud. They think they have the advantage. Reacher calmly looks at them and says, "I don't want to fight." 2 seconds later, everyone is on the floor. And somehow, it's both brutal and funny at the same time. That's the tone of Reacher. And it's one of the biggest reasons the show works. In an era where many shows try to reinvent the genre, Reacher does something surprisingly simple. It embraces classic action storytelling. The formula is familiar. A mysterious outsider arrives. Corruption is hiding beneath the surface. Bad people are abusing their power. And one man decides to stop them. There's no complicated mythology. No universe building. No endless subplots. Just a clear moral line between the hero and the villains. It feels closer to classic action films and westerns than modern superhero stories. The kind of story where justice arrives in the form of a quiet stranger. But make no mistake, this isn't a gentle show. The violence in Reacher is raw and direct. Fights are quick. Bones break. Blood splatters. And when Reacher decides someone deserves a beating, the show doesn't soften the impact. There are shootouts, ambushes, prison fights, street brawls, and sometimes the brutality pushes the series into very dark territory. It's the kind of action that reminds you this isn't a glossy superhero world. This is a much rougher version of justice. What makes the tone so unique, though, is the humor hiding underneath all that violence. Reacher isn't a loud, wisecracking action hero. His humor is dry. Almost accidental. He delivers lines with the same calm tone, whether he's ordering coffee or threatening criminals. And that creates some genuinely funny moments. Especially when arrogant villains try to intimidate him. Because they always think they're in control. Until they realize they absolutely are not. Sometimes the funniest part of a scene is watching Reacher patiently explain exactly how things are about to go wrong for someone. And then calmly proving it. That balance between brutality and humor is what keeps the show entertaining. Too much violence alone would make the series exhausting. Too much comedy would make it feel like a parody. But Reacher finds a strange middle ground. The action is serious. The threats are real. But the show never forgets that it's supposed to be fun. You're meant to enjoy watching the bad guys finally meet someone stronger, smarter, and completely unimpressed by their threats. Another important part of the tone is the character himself. Reacher isn't polished. He isn't glamorous. He doesn't try to be heroic in a traditional sense. He's blunt, socially awkward, sometimes cold, sometimes strangely compassionate. And that combination makes him feel different from typical action protagonists. He doesn't chase glory. He doesn't stay for applause. He solves the problem and then he moves on. Of course, tone alone isn't enough to keep viewers watching. Because once the fights start, once the bullets begin flying, the real question becomes this: how good is the action itself? And in Reacher, the action isn't just frequent. Sometimes it's absolutely brutal. If there's one thing Reacher promises from the very first episode, it's this: when a fight starts, it ends quickly. No dramatic speeches. No spinning martial arts choreography. No flashy superhero moves. Just one extremely large man solving problems the fastest way possible. And that's exactly why the action in Reacher feels different from most modern shows. Most action heroes fight to impress the audience. Reacher fights to end the situation immediately. That's a key difference. His combat style isn't flashy. It's efficient. A punch. A throw. A bone-breaking takedown. And suddenly the fight is over. The choreography reflects the character's personality, practical, brutal, and direct. Reacher doesn't perform. He eliminates threats. And that simplicity makes every fight feel believable, at least in the moment. The action in the series works because it relies on physical impact, not spectacle. Many modern shows drown their fight scenes in rapid cuts and visual effects. Reacher often does the opposite. The camera stays close. You see the hits. You hear the impact. When someone makes the mistake of attacking Reacher, the consequences feel immediate. There's no illusion about who has the advantage. And that's part of the fun. The audience already knows how the confrontation will end. The suspense comes from how quickly it happens. The show doesn't limit the action to just fistfights. Across the series you see bar fights, prison brawls, ambushes, shootouts, street confrontations, high-stakes standoffs. Each situation pushes Reacher into a different kind of battle. Sometimes he's outnumbered. Sometimes he's surrounded. Sometimes the threat is armed. But the outcome rarely changes. The people causing trouble eventually realize one important fact: they picked the wrong opponent. What separates Reacher from lighter action shows is how uncomfortable the violence can feel. When fights happen, they're not stylized. They're messy. Bones crack. Blood splatters. Enemies go down hard. The series doesn't try to sanitize the damage. That rawness gives the action weight. You don't just see Reacher winning fights, you see the cost of those confrontations. And it reinforces the idea that violence is never casual in this world, even when it's satisfying. Of course, the show sometimes pushes the limits of realism. Reacher gets into a lot of fights. A lot. Groups of criminals seem strangely confident challenging someone who looks like he could bench press a truck. And injuries often disappear faster than they should. Characters get shot, stabbed, or thrown through walls and somehow keep moving. For some viewers, that stretches believability. For others, it's simply part of the genre. Because Reacher isn't trying to be a medical documentary. It's delivering action fantasy with grounded choreography. At the end of the day, the appeal of these scenes is psychological. Watching corrupt villains behave like they're untouchable, then watching them run into someone who absolutely isn't afraid of them, that's the payoff. The fights aren't just about physical domination. They're about moral consequences. Bad people finally meeting someone who won't back down. And when that moment comes, Reacher doesn't hesitate. But action alone doesn't carry a show. Behind every fight, every ambush, every shootout, there's still a story trying to hold everything together. And that raises the next big question. How strong is the writing behind all this action? Action can make a show exciting. Characters can make a show memorable. But writing is what makes a show work. And with Reacher, the writing is where opinions really start to split. Because sometimes the show feels like a clever crime thriller, and other times it feels like a classic action story that isn't trying too hard to hide its formula. At its best, the writing in Reacher does exactly what a thriller should do. It builds a puzzle. One clue leads to another. A suspicious detail becomes a breakthrough. A conversation reveals something hidden. And slowly, piece by piece, the bigger picture starts to appear. Season 1 especially benefits from this structure. The investigation moves forward at a steady pace. Each episode reveals another layer of the conspiracy in Margrave. And the audience gets the satisfaction of watching Reacher connect dots that other people completely miss. That kind of storytelling is what keeps viewers hooked. You want to see how the puzzle fits together. But the writing isn't perfect. One of the most common criticisms of the show is predictability. Sometimes the story telegraphs its twists early. Villains behave exactly how you expect them to behave. And certain plot developments arrive right on schedule. For some viewers, that familiarity is part of the fun. It feels like watching an old-school action thriller. But for others, it removes the suspense. When you can guess the next line of dialogue before it's spoken, the tension starts to fade. Another issue that occasionally appears in the series is exposition. Reacher is written as an extremely analytical character. He notices patterns. He reconstructs crime scenes in his head. He explains how events must have unfolded. But sometimes the show leans too heavily on these explanations. Instead of letting the audience figure things out, the script occasionally spells everything out. There are even moments where villains explain their entire plan out loud. Not because it makes sense for the character, but because the story needs to wrap things up. When that happens, the writing can feel mechanical. Then there are the coincidences. The right person appearing at the exact right moment. A character arriving just in time to save someone. Two people reaching the same location at precisely the same second. These moments happen more than once. And when they pile up, they can make the story feel less grounded. For some viewers, this breaks immersion. For others, it's simply part of the genre. After all, Reacher has always lived somewhere between detective fiction and action fantasy. The pacing of the series is another interesting element. Early episodes often move slowly. They focus on investigation, character dynamics, building tension. At times, this slower pace can feel deliberate, even a little tedious. But the payoff usually comes in the later episodes. Once the conspiracy is fully revealed, the story accelerates quickly. Revelations pile up. Alliances shift. And the final confrontation arrives with explosive momentum. In other words, the show builds slowly, but it usually finishes strong. Despite its flaws, the writing still manages to keep the audience engaged. Because the structure is clear. The goals are simple. And the characters always feel like they're moving toward something important. Even when the plot becomes predictable, even when the dialogue gets a little heavy, the story still delivers enough intrigue and momentum to keep viewers watching. But there's one deeper issue hiding beneath all of this. One question that fans of the books often debate. Is the series really capturing the full intelligence of Jack Reacher? Because in the novels, Reacher isn't just a fighter. He's a brilliant investigator. And whether the show captures that balance is a whole different discussion. When people first see Jack Reacher on screen, the first thing they notice is obvious. He's huge. A towering presence who looks like he could break a door down without even trying. But here's the truth that fans of the books know very well. Jack Reacher isn't dangerous because he's strong. He's dangerous because he's smart. And whether the series captures that balance between brains and brute force is one of the biggest debates surrounding the show. In Lee Child's novels, Reacher isn't just a fighter wandering from town to town. He's a trained military investigator. A former major who led the Army's elite special investigators. That means his real weapon isn't his fists. It's his mind. Reacher notices details that most people ignore. The position of a body. The way someone stands. The timing of a lie. Small clues that, when combined, reveal the truth hiding behind the surface. Before a fight ever starts, Reacher has usually already figured out the situation. He knows who's lying. He knows who's dangerous. And he knows exactly how things are about to unfold. At its best, the series captures this side of the character beautifully. Especially in the early episodes. Reacher quietly observes the world around him. He reconstructs crimes from tiny details. He reads people like open books. Sometimes it feels almost Sherlock-like. Except instead of a brilliant detective solving mysteries with clever speeches, this detective can also throw a 250-pound man through a wall. Those moments are when the character feels most authentic. Because they remind the audience that Reacher isn't winning fights by accident. He's winning because he already understands the situation better than anyone else in the room. But as the series continues, some viewers feel that balance begins to shift. The investigations become less central. The action becomes more frequent. And the character sometimes feels less like a brilliant strategist and more like an unstoppable force who simply punches his way through problems. For long-time readers of the books, that change can feel frustrating. Because the intelligence of the character is what makes him unique. Without that, Reacher risks becoming just another action hero. A very large one. But still just another action hero. Part of the challenge comes from the difference between books and television. In the novels, readers spend time inside Reacher's head. They hear his thoughts. They follow his logic step by step. On screen, that internal reasoning is much harder to show. The show has to translate those thought processes into dialogue or visual clues. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it feels like the character is simply explaining everything out loud. And sometimes the show skips the reasoning entirely and jumps straight to the fight. This balance between intelligence and power is what defines Jack Reacher. If he were only strong, the stories would be predictable. If he were only smart, they wouldn't be nearly as exciting. The character works because he is both. A thinker and a fighter. A quiet observer who can also become a human wrecking ball when necessary. And when the show captures that balance, that's when Reacher feels closest to the character fans fell in love with. But the way that balance plays out actually changes from season to season. Some seasons focus more on investigation. Others lean heavily into action. Which raises the next big question about the series. How consistent is Reacher across its different seasons? Not every season of Reacher feels the same. Some episodes feel like a tightly written crime thriller. Others feel like a full-blown action spectacle. And depending on who you ask, the quality of the show changes dramatically from season to season. So the real question becomes, which version of Reacher works best? For many viewers, Season 1 is where the show truly shines. This season adapts Lee Child's novel, Killing Floor. And the story benefits from something incredibly important: focus. Everything takes place in the small town of Margrave, Georgia. The setting is contained. The mystery unfolds slowly. And the investigation builds tension step by step. Reacher arrives as a stranger, gets arrested for murder, and soon discovers a conspiracy hidden deep inside the town. What makes this season work so well is the balance. There's action. There's investigation. There's character development. And the relationships between Reacher, Finlay, and Roscoe give the story emotional weight. For many fans, this is the version of the show that feels closest to the spirit of the books. Season 2 changes the formula. Instead of focusing on a single town, the story expands. New locations appear. The scale becomes larger. And Reacher reunites with members of his former military unit. This shift creates a very different kind of story. Now the series feels less like a detective mystery and more like a team-based action thriller. Some viewers enjoy this expansion. It adds backstory. It explores Reacher's past. And it allows the show to introduce new characters and bigger conflicts. But others feel the change comes at a cost. The intimate mystery that made Season 1 so compelling starts to disappear. And the show leans more heavily on action rather than investigation. For those viewers, Season 2 feels less focused. By the time Season 3 arrives, the show begins adjusting its approach again. The series keeps the action-heavy style, but tries to bring more mystery back into the story. New cases. New settings. New villains. But the core formula remains the same. Reacher arrives somewhere new, trouble finds him, and another hidden conspiracy begins to unfold. Some viewers feel this season improves the balance again. Others feel it still struggles to match the tight storytelling of the first season. But even critics often admit that the show remains entertaining. The reason these differences happen is simple. Each season tells a different type of Reacher story. Some books focus on mystery. Some focus on revenge. Some focus on action. And when the show adapts those different styles, the tone naturally changes. Sometimes the balance between investigation and action works perfectly. Sometimes it tilts too far in one direction. But the core appeal of the character remains the same. No matter how much the story changes, one thing stays consistent. Jack Reacher. He's still the wandering drifter. Still the quiet observer. Still the man who walks into corruption and refuses to walk away. The settings change. The villains change. The conspiracies change. But the character remains the anchor, holding everything together. Of course, Reacher doesn't exist in a vacuum. The show is constantly compared to other action series, other detective stories, and even the earlier movies about the character. And those comparisons reveal something very interesting about where Reacher fits in the world of modern action television. Whenever a new adaptation of a famous character appears, one thing always happens. People start comparing to earlier versions, to similar shows, to other heroes in the same genre. And Reacher is no exception. Because the moment the series premiered, viewers immediately started asking one big question: how does this version of Jack Reacher compare to everything that came before it? The first and most obvious comparison is the earlier film adaptations. Before the series existed, the character had already appeared in 2 movies. Those films delivered solid action and strong performances. But they also sparked one of the biggest debates in modern action adaptations. The character on screen didn't match the character readers imagined. In the books, Reacher is described as massive. A towering, intimidating presence. The kind of man who dominates a room just by walking into it. The films captured the intelligence and determination of the character, but visually, something felt different. And that's where the series changes the conversation. With Alan Ritchson, the show finally presents a Reacher who physically resembles the one readers have pictured for years. That single decision immediately separates the series from the films. Beyond the movies, the series also invites comparisons with other action and crime shows. Some viewers compare it to gritty crime dramas. Others see similarities with investigative thrillers. But the tone of Reacher actually sits somewhere in between. It has the mystery structure of detective series, the brutality of crime thrillers, and the straightforward justice of classic action stories. That blend places the show in an interesting space. It isn't trying to reinvent the genre. It's lining into it. In many ways, Reacher feels like a throwback. The character himself fits into a long tradition of action heroes. The lone outsider. The man who arrives in a troubled place and fixes the problem. It's a structure that echoes older action films, crime thrillers, and even classic westerns. The difference is that Reacher brings a modern edge. He's not just a fighter. He's also a strategist. A quiet observer who studies people before acting. Which gives the character a unique presence compared to many other action leads. One criticism that sometimes appears is that the show feels familiar. Seasoned viewers may recognize elements from other crime stories. Hidden conspiracies. Corrupt officials. Secret criminal networks. But familiarity isn't necessarily a weakness. Because what the series does well is execute those ideas with confidence. It understands the pleasures of the genre. A charismatic hero. A dangerous mystery. And villains who eventually learn they made a terrible mistake. Despite the comparisons, Reacher still manages to carve out its own identity. Part of that comes from the character himself. Reacher isn't flashy. He doesn't chase glory. He doesn't even stay long enough to be celebrated. He arrives. He solves the problem. And then he disappears. That wandering nature gives the series a different rhythm from most action shows. Every new story begins with a stranger stepping into a new situation. And that keeps the formula feeling fresh. But when you look at all these comparisons, the movies, the action shows, the detective series, one thing becomes clear. Reacher sits right in the middle of all of them. Which raises the final question. Is the series actually great or simply entertaining? Because depending on who you ask, the answer can be very different. Here's the strange thing about Reacher. Two people can watch the exact same episode and walk away with completely different opinions. One viewer says, this is one of the most entertaining action shows on television. Another viewer says, this is predictable, unrealistic, and completely ridiculous. So what's going on? Why does Reacher divide audiences so much? Let's start with what the series absolutely gets right. First, the character. Jack Reacher is a compelling hero. A quiet drifter who refuses to tolerate corruption. He's intimidating, intelligent, and oddly likable despite the chaos he leaves behind. Second, the action. The fights are brutal, direct, and often incredibly satisfying to watch. There's a certain pleasure in seeing arrogant villains finally realize they've made a terrible mistake. And the show delivers those moments again and again. Third, the simplicity of the storytelling. Unlike many modern shows overloaded with complicated subplots and endless mythology, Reacher keeps things clear. A mystery. A villain. A hero determined to expose the truth. That straightforward structure makes the show easy to follow and easy to enjoy. But the same qualities that make the series fun can also create its biggest weaknesses. The plot sometimes becomes predictable. Certain twists are easy to see coming. And some villains behave exactly the way you expect them to. Then there's the realism problem. Reacher often survives situations that would realistically end a normal person's story very quickly. Gunfights, explosions, brutal brawls, and yet the characters keep moving as if nothing happened. For some viewers, this breaks the illusion. It makes the world feel exaggerated, almost like an action fantasy. The writing is another area where opinions split. Supporters say the show delivers exactly what it promises. A fast-paced thriller with clear storytelling and exciting confrontations. Critics argue the dialogue can feel cliched, and the plot sometimes relies on convenient coincidences. Villains explaining their entire plan. Characters arriving at exactly the right moment to save someone. These moments remind the audience that the story is carefully constructed rather than completely organic. And this is where the real divide appears. Because the enjoyment of Reacher depends heavily on what you expect from it. If you want deep realism, subtle writing, and unpredictable storytelling, the show might feel shallow. But if you're looking for something different, a confident action series, a powerful hero, and a story that delivers satisfying justice again and again, then Reacher does exactly what it promises. In many ways, Reacher understands its own identity better than many modern shows. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It's not a complex political drama. It's not a philosophical character study. It's a modern action thriller built around a larger-than-life hero. And for a lot of viewers, that honesty is refreshing. So when all the fights are over, when the mystery is solved, and when Reacher walks away from another town full of broken villains, there's one final question left. What kind of show is Reacher really? A great television series, or simply a very entertaining one? At the end of the day, every show faces the same question. Not how many fights it has. Not how many twists it delivers. But one simple thing, is it worth watching? And with Reacher, the answer depends entirely on what kind of viewer you are. Because when you step back and look at the series as a whole, one thing becomes very clear. Reacher knows exactly what it wants to be. It's not trying to reinvent television. It's not chasing complicated storytelling trends. Instead, it embraces something much simpler. A powerful hero. A dangerous mystery. And a world where corruption eventually meets its consequences. That formula may be familiar, but the show delivers it with confidence. Watching Reacher is a very specific kind of experience. You're not watching to see if the hero survives. You already know he will. You're watching to see how he solves the problem, how he studies the situation, how he exposes the villains, and how he eventually dismantles the entire system standing in his way. There's something deeply satisfying about that structure. A sense that no matter how powerful the villains appear, eventually, they're going to meet someone they can't intimidate. And this is where the series succeeds most consistently. It's entertaining. The episodes move quickly. The mysteries keep unfolding. The action delivers impact. And the character at the center of it all remains compelling enough to carry the story forward. Even when the writing becomes predictable, even when realism occasionally disappears, the show still manages to keep viewers engaged. Because the formula works. But Reacher isn't trying to please everyone. If you're looking for intricate storytelling, subtle character drama, and complete realism, you might find the show exaggerated. The violence can be over the top. The plot sometimes leans on familiar thriller ideas. And the dialogue occasionally slips into classic action cliches. But if you enjoy old-school action stories, if you enjoy watching corrupt villains finally face consequences, and if you like a hero who solves problems with both brains and brute force, then Reacher delivers exactly what you're looking for. At the center of it all is the character himself. Jack Reacher. The drifter. The observer. The man who walks into a broken system and refuses to ignore what he sees. He doesn't stay long. He doesn't ask for recognition. He simply fixes the problem and then disappears down the road again. That simplicity is what has kept the character popular for decades. And it's what allows the series to keep working season after season. So is Reacher perfect? No. Is it groundbreaking television? Probably not. But it is something that many shows struggle to be. Consistently entertaining. A confident action series built around a hero who never backs down, never overcomplicates things, and never forgets which side he's on. And as long as Jack Reacher keeps stepping off buses into towns full of trouble, there will always be an audience waiting to watch what happens next. Final verdict: so after everything, the mystery, the action, the twists, and the explosive confrontations, the big question remains, is Reacher 2022 actually worth watching? The short answer, absolutely. What makes this series stand out is how confidently it knows what kind of story it wants to tell. It doesn't try to be overly complicated, and it doesn't rely on unnecessary drama. Instead, it focuses on delivering a tight, engaging crime story led by one incredibly compelling character. And that character is the heart of the entire show. Jack Reacher is not your typical hero. He doesn't chase fame, he doesn't care about recognition, and he certainly doesn't follow the rules if those rules protect the wrong people. What makes him interesting is the combination of intelligence, calm confidence, and overwhelming physical presence. When he walks into a room, people notice. And when he starts asking questions, someone usually gets nervous. Another major strength of the series is its pacing. The investigation unfolds step by step, revealing clues and secrets at just the right moments to keep viewers hooked. Every episode pushes the story forward while building tension toward the final confrontation. And when the action arrives, it feels raw and impactful rather than exaggerated or unrealistic. Of course, no show is completely perfect. Some viewers might wish certain supporting characters had more screen time, while others may find the story follows a few familiar action thriller patterns. But even with those minor criticisms, the overall experience remains incredibly satisfying. Because at its core, Reacher delivers exactly what fans want: a gripping mystery, a powerful central character, and a story where justice eventually catches up with corruption. If you enjoy crime thrillers, investigative dramas, and action stories with a strong lone hero, this series is definitely worth your time. And the best part, this story is only the beginning. Because somewhere out there, another town probably thinks its secrets are safe until Jack Reacher decides to visit.